I am Rebecca, 32 years old, and last month I sat quietly at a mahogany conference table while my parents tried to legally strip me of my own inheritance to bail out my older brother. My brother Kevin had just been fired from his job, and my mother decided I should simply take over his $5,000 a month mortgage. When I refused, my father stood up, pointed a trembling finger at the door, and told me to get out of the family. My mother smiled that tight, polite smile of hers and added that they would be leaving the family estate entirely to Kevin. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just smiled back, picked up my purse, and walked out into the cold. They thought they had triumphed. They thought they had finally put the ungrateful daughter in her place, securing their golden boy's future forever. They had no idea that my late grandmother's attorney was already holding a signed document that was about to turn their entire reality to ash. My brother wasn't getting the house. None of them were. Before I show you exactly how a polite smile can tear an entitled family down to the studs, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Sophia Vengeance. And if you are watching right now, drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from. I read every single one, and I love seeing our community grow. Now let me take you back to a freezing Tuesday in November, the day the polite facade began to crack. Minnesota winters do not announce themselves with a shout. They arrive in degrees, a slow creeping freeze that hardens the lakes and coats the birch trees in frost until the entire landscape feels perfectly, beautifully brittle. People here pride themselves on handling the cold. We smile at the grocery store, we bring hot casseroles to grieving neighbors, and we speak in a measured, polite cadence designed to keep the ice outside where it belongs. It is a culture built on the premise of Minnesota nice, the unspoken agreement that a warm tone can cover a multitude of sins. But ice has a way of finding the cracks in the foundation. I am sitting at my desk on the 40th floor of a corporate financial firm in downtown Minneapolis. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sky is the color of wet iron. Inside, the air smells like ozone and expensive roasted coffee. I am a financial analyst. I deal in risk assessment, quarterly projections, and cold hard math. Numbers tell a story that people desperately try to hide, and I am very good at reading them. My phone buzzes against the glass top of my desk. The screen lights up with my mother's name, Susan. My stomach gives that familiar involuntary tightening, the one I have felt since I was 10 years old. I take a slow breath, clear my throat, and answer. "Hi, Mom." "Rebecca, sweetie?" Her voice pours through the speaker thick and sugary. It is the exact tone she uses when she is about to hand you a burden disguised as a favor. "How is the weather downtown? Are you staying warm in that big office?" I stare at a spreadsheet tracking tech sector deficits, my eyes tracing the red columns. "I am fine, Mom, just reviewing some Q3 reports. What is going on?" She sighs, a fragile, practiced sound designed to elicit sympathy. "Well, we have had some difficult news today. It is about your brother. Kevin decided to resign from his firm this morning. He is looking for a better cultural fit." I stop typing. My fingers hover over the keyboard. Resigned. People do not resign from senior account director positions 2 weeks before the holiday bonus rollout. They are shown the door. Knowing Kevin, his chronic tardiness and habit of taking 3-hour client lunches on the company card had finally caught up with him. "That is tough," I say, keeping my voice neutral. "I am sure he will find something soon." There is a brief pause. The sugary tone recedes, replaced by something much sharper, like a razor blade hidden inside a piece of candy. "Yes, well, the timing is less than ideal. Kevin has his mortgage in Edina. He has the lease on the Rover, and you know he just booked that ski trip to Aspen for the holidays. He cannot lose those deposits. Your father and I have talked it over, and we figured out a solution." My jaw clenches. The muscles in the back of my neck pull tight. A solution. "We need you to take over his mortgage payments until he gets back on his feet," she says, the words clipping along at a brisk, business-like pace. "Just for a few months, it makes the most sense." I look at the numbers on my screen, but I am doing a different kind of math in my head. Kevin's mortgage is at least $4,000 a month. The luxury SUV is another $1,000. She is not asking for a temporary loan to buy groceries. She is asking me to fund the extravagant lifestyle of a 35-year-old man who still brings his laundry home on Sundays for her to wash. "Mom, I cannot pay Kevin's mortgage." Oh, do not be silly, Rebecca. She laughs a sound like dry leaves scraping across pavement. I saw on LinkedIn that your firm distributed those year-end bonuses early this week. A substantial sum from what I gather in the industry news. It is such a blessing that you have that extra cushion right when your family needs it. My blood runs cold. She had been monitoring my corporate page. She saw the press release about the analyst bonuses and immediately calculated how much of my hard-earned money she could redirect to her golden child. This was the dynamic of my entire life playing out in real time. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, while Kevin's out-of-state tuition and credit card debts were quietly erased by my parents' checkbook. They worshipped his supposed prestige while treating my quiet competence as a limitless resource for him to mine. My bonus is going into my retirement portfolio, and the index fund I manage, I say, my voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of polite warmth. I earn my money, Mom. Kevin's financial mismanagement is not my emergency. If he cannot afford a luxury house without a job, he needs to sell it. The polite mask shatters. I hear a sharp, icy gasp pull through the phone receiver. The silence that follows is heavy, buzzing with unsaid insults. When she finally speaks, her voice shakes with naked disdain. I cannot believe I raised a daughter with such a cold, calculating heart. Your brother is suffering. We are supposed to be a family, but I suppose those numbers on your computer screen mean more to you than your own flesh and blood. You have always been so selfish, Rebecca. Always counting pennies while Kevin actually tries to live his life. Before I can respond, the line clicks dead. She hung up on me. I slowly lower the phone to the desk. The hum of the office ventilation system seems incredibly loud in my ears. I trace the edge of my keyboard, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt to wash over me. The guilt they had spent 3 decades programming into my head, teaching me that my only value was in how useful I could be to Kevin. But the guilt does not come. Instead, I feel a strange, hollow clarity. 10 minutes later, the screen of my phone lights up again. Not a call this time, a text message from my father. Your mother is in tears. Cancel whatever plans you have this weekend. We are having a family dinner on Sunday at 6. We will discuss your brother's transition plan then. Do not be late. I read the text twice, the glare of the screen reflecting in my eyes. It is not an invitation, it is a summons. The golden child has stumbled, and the scapegoat is being ordered to step up and break her own back to carry him. I lock my phone, turn back to my spreadsheets, and begin running a different set of projections. If they want to talk about transitions, I will be ready. Sunday evening arrived with a bitter wind that stripped the last remaining dead leaves from the oak trees lining my parents' street. I pulled my sedan into their wide driveway, the tires crunching over a fresh layer of frost. The house sat far back from the road, a sprawling suburban fortress of brick and manicured hedges, designed to project quiet success to the neighbors. Parked right in the center of the driveway, blocking the path to the garage, was Kevin's luxury SUV. The paint gleamed under the security lights, a $70,000 monument to a man who no longer had a paycheck. I stepped out into the freezing air, gathered my coat tight around my shoulders, and walked up the front steps. Before I could even press the doorbell, the heavy door swung inward. My mother stood in the foyer wearing a crisp linen blouse and an apron, her hair sprayed into an immaculate blonde helmet. The suffocating smell of roasted meat and heavy cream spilled out of the house, battling the crisp winter air. Rebecca, she said, her voice pitched in that sing-song melody she reserved for church socials and passive hostility. You are 3 minutes late. Come inside before you let the cold ruin the temperature in the hallway. I stepped over the threshold, pulling off my gloves. The house was stifling. The thermostat pushed high enough to make the air feel thick in my lungs. From the formal dining room, I could hear the clink of silverware against crystal. They were already seated. The stage was set. I hung my coat in the hall closet and walked into the dining room. The space was dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. My father Richard sat at the head, nursing a glass of dark red wine. Kevin sat to his right, wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my first car. He did not look like a man facing financial ruin. He looked like a prince waiting for his subjects to pay tribute. Have a seat, my father directed, gesturing to the empty chair across from Kevin with his wine glass. Your mother worked very hard on this meal. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. My mother swept into the room carrying a heavy ceramic casserole dish with oven mitts, placing it squarely in the center of the table. The surface of the dish bubbled a thick crust of golden brown potato cylinders resting on top of a rich, creamy base. "Tater tot hot dish," my mother announced, sighing heavily as she removed her oven mitts and wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, performing exhaustion for her audience. I stood on my feet for 3 hours putting this together from scratch. My knees are aching, but I know it brings comfort to this family. I know how much my boy needs a home-cooked meal right now. She spooned a large steaming mound onto Kevin's plate, first patting his shoulder as she served him. The maternal martyrdom was so thick it was almost suffocating. She used the hot dish the same way she used everything else, as a prop to demonstrate her endless sacrifice, demanding unspoken gratitude in return. She served my father next and finally dropped a much smaller portion onto my plate. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The rich, heavy food coated my tongue, but I tasted nothing. Looking across the table at Kevin chewing his food with a look of supreme contentment, an old, familiar resentment curled in the pit of my stomach. During my college years, I never saw a home-cooked meal. I lived on instant noodles and stale dining hall bagels. I worked the early shift at the campus library, the evening shift at a local diner, and weekends managing the IT help desk just to cover my tuition and rent. I graduated with honors and dark circles under my eyes. Kevin went to an expensive private university out of state. He joined a fraternity, failed 3 semesters, and took an extra year to graduate. My parents covered every single dime of his tuition. When he maxed out his credit cards on spring break trips to Cabo, my father quietly wrote a check to clear the balance, claiming a young man needed to network and build life experiences. They paved a golden road for him while handing me a shovel and telling me to dig my own path. Richard cleared his throat, setting his fork down on his porcelain plate. The sound echoed in the quiet room, signaling the end of the pleasantries. "We brought you here today to discuss family duty," my father began, lacing his fingers together over his stomach. He spoke in the measured, authoritative tone of a man used to giving orders in a boardroom. "Your brother has hit a temporary roadblock in his career path. The current job market is unpredictable, and Kevin needs the space to find a position that properly aligns with his level of prestige and expertise." Kevin nodded solemnly, taking a sip of his water. He did not look at me. During this transition, my father continued, "We must ensure his assets are protected. A gap in his housing history or a repossession would damage his credit and his professional reputation. Your mother and I are preparing for retirement, so our liquid capital is currently tied up in investments. Therefore, the responsibility falls to you." My father reached down beside his chair and pulled out a manila folder. He opened it, extracted a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the polished mahogany. The paper stopped right next to my water glass. I looked down. It was a printed spreadsheet. I'm a financial analyst. I look at balance sheets, risk assessments, and debt-to-income ratios for 10 hours a day. I know how to read financial distress. The spreadsheet my father handed me was not a request for a temporary lifeline. It was an itemized list of sheer unchecked entitlement. The columns detailed Kevin's monthly liabilities: the mortgage on the 5-bedroom house in Edina, the lease payment for the luxury Rover parked in the driveway, the premium health club membership, the monthly wine subscription box, the scheduled deposits for a holiday ski trip in Aspen. The total sum at the bottom of the column was a staggering number, far exceeding what an average family earns in a month. I kept my eyes on the paper, maintaining a flat-line calmness. I did not let my breath hitch. I did not let my hands shake. I read every single line item, letting the silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in the uncomfortable quiet of their own audacity. When I finally looked up, Kevin was staring at me. A faint, arrogant smirk played at the corners of his mouth. He leaned back in his chair, draping one arm over the backrest. He looked entirely confident, absolutely certain that his quiet, reliable little sister would pull out her checkbook and absorb his failures just as she always had absorbed the family's neglect. He expected me to bow my head and carry his weight. I reached out, picked up my silver fork, and placed it neatly on the edge of my plate. The soft clink rang out like a bell. No. The word hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. My mother stopped chewing. My father narrowed his eyes. Kevin's smirk froze on his face. "Excuse me," my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. I tapped a manicured fingernail against the spreadsheet. I said, "No, I am not paying these bills. You handed this to a financial analyst, so let us review the math together." I looked directly at Kevin, locking eyes with him. His smug expression began to waver under the cold, analytical weight of my stare. "You have listed a country club membership and a luxury car lease as essential expenses," I said, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion. "You are currently generating zero income. Your debt-to-income ratio is astronomical. You are not asking for a bridge loan to keep a roof over your head. You are asking me to finance a wealthy lifestyle that you have not earned and cannot afford." My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her pearl necklace. "Rebecca Foster, how dare you speak to your brother that way? He is going through a crisis." "This is not a crisis, Mom," I replied, shifting my gaze to her. "A crisis is an unexpected medical emergency. This is the predictable consequence of living beyond your means. If Kevin cannot afford a 5-bedroom house, the logical, responsible step is to list the property for sale tomorrow and downsize to an apartment he can maintain on savings. I will not penalize my own financial future to subsidize his ego." The polite, neighborly facade of the dining room evaporated in an instant. The temperature in the room plummeted, leaving only raw, ugly exposure. The truth had finally been spoken out loud, and they could not handle the sound of it. Kevin's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. He looked at our father, a silent plea for the patriarch to step in and crush the rebellion. My father did not disappoint him. Richard pushed his chair back, his face mottled with heat, a dark purple hue creeping up his neck. The measured corporate tone vanished, replaced by a visceral, shaking fury. He had never been told no by anyone under his roof, least of all the daughter he considered an afterthought. He raised his right arm, curling his hand into a tight ball. His fist struck the oak wood of the dining table with a deafening crack. The crystal water glasses rattled. The heavy ceramic casserole dish vibrated. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," my father snarled, leaning over the table, his eyes burning into mine. The tension snapped the air in the room, turning electric and violent. The facade was gone, and the true cost of their love was about to be presented in full. Richard stood up his heavy dining chair, scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor. The sound shrieked through the silent room, a jagged noise that made my mother flinch. He towered over the mahogany table, casting a long, imposing shadow across the untouched, bubbling casserole. The veins in his thick neck pulsed with a rapid, furious rhythm, his face flushing a deep, mottled crimson that clashed with his pristine, tailored shirt. "You listen to me," he commanded, his voice vibrating with a dangerous resonance that usually made his corporate subordinates cower in fear. "We did not raise a daughter to hoard her paycheck while her own flesh and blood faces the street. You will take that spreadsheet, you will transfer those funds to Kevin by tomorrow morning, and you will apologize to your mother for disrespecting her table." I sat perfectly still. My hands remained neatly folded in my lap. I did not shrink back against the cushion of my chair. For my entire childhood, that booming authoritative voice had been the ultimate terror, a sound that signaled immediate compliance or swift destruction. But looking up at him right now, I did not see a powerful patriarch controlling his empire. I just saw a desperate aging man throwing a tantrum because his favorite toy was broken. My mother chimed in, stepping up beside him, her hands trembling as she clutched the back of Kevin's seat. Her polite, neighborly facade had entirely melted away, leaving only raw, frantic spite. "Richard is right," she insisted, her tone shrill and bordering on hysterical. "You owe this family, Rebecca. We gave you a roof over your head. We gave you a life. If you walk away from your brother now, you are walking away from us." My father leaned forward, placing both of his heavy palms flat on the dining table, closing the physical distance between us to amplify his intimidation. "Let me make this crystal clear," he hissed his breath, frosting the delicate rim of his wine glass. "You have a choice to make tonight. You either assume Kevin's financial obligations and prove you belong in this family, or you are no longer a part of it." The threat hung in the thick, stifling air of the dining room, heavy and suffocating. Disownment. It was the nuclear option, the ultimate punishment they kept locked away in their arsenal for a moment exactly like this. They expected me to crumble. They expected me to burst into tears, to beg for their forgiveness, to desperately pull out my checkbook to buy back their conditional affection. And do not think we will forget this when it comes time to read the will, my father continued, pushing his advantage, firmly believing he had discovered my breaking point. If you turn your back on your brother, we will cut you out entirely. Every single asset, every investment portfolio, and the lake house in Wayzata. It will all go to Kevin. You will not get a single dime of the Foster legacy. The Wayzata estate. It was a stunning, sprawling property nestled right on the edge of the water, boasting panoramic views of the pristine Minnesota landscape, vaulted ceilings, and a private dock. For my parents, it was their crowning jewel, the ultimate symbol of their wealth, their prestige, and their social standing among the local elite. They worshipped that house. For me, it held a very different meaning. My gaze drifted away from my father's red, furious face and settled on the stone mantel directly behind him. Sitting right in the center, flanked by expensive silver candlesticks and crystal vases, was a cheap plastic snow globe from the Mall of America. The liquid inside the globe was slightly cloudy from age, and the tiny plastic replica of the indoor roller coaster was faded by the sun. It was a souvenir my late grandmother Evelyn had bought for me when I was 9 years old, during a rare weekend when my parents had abandoned me at home to take Kevin to a highly exclusive, out-of-state hockey camp. Grandmother Evelyn was the only person in this sprawling suburban fortress who ever truly saw me. She did not care about corporate titles, country club memberships, or the illusion of perfection. She noticed when I was quiet. She praised my academic grades, and she taught me that true human value had nothing to do with a bank balance. That faded snow globe was the only piece of genuine, unconditional love left in this entire house. Looking at that plastic trinket, a profound sense of peace washed over my body. The anxiety that had gripped my chest for 32 years simply evaporated, leaving behind a pristine, icy clarity. I looked back at my father. He was waiting for my immediate surrender, panting slightly, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. Kevin was leaning forward in his chair, watching me with a greedy, anticipatory gleam in his eyes, already calculating how quickly my bonus could clear his overdue accounts. My mother was holding her breath, waiting for the apology she felt she was owed. I felt the corners of my mouth lift. I smiled. It was not a sarcastic smirk or a defensive grimace. It was a genuine, devastatingly serene smile, the kind of smile you give a door-to-door salesman who has just offered you a terrible bargain. "Okay," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. The single word landed like a physical blow to the stomach. My father blinked, visibly thrown off balance by the lack of resistance. His imposing posture faltered for a fraction of a second. "What did you say?" he demanded, a sudden thread of uncertainty bleeding into his booming tone. I pushed my chair back slowly, the wood gliding smoothly over the expensive Persian rug. I stood up, smoothing the front of my slacks with calm, deliberate movements. I said, "Okay," I repeated, maintaining that steady, unbothered eye contact. "If the price of admission to this family is subsidizing Kevin's irresponsibility for the rest of my life, then I cannot afford it. Keep your money. Keep the lake house. I will see myself out." I turned my back on them. I did not wait for a response, nor did I offer a dramatic closing argument. I walked out of the formal dining room with measured, deliberate steps. I could feel the sheer weight of their stunned silence pressing against my spine. Their primary weapon, the paralyzing fear of abandonment, had spectacularly failed. They had spent my entire existence convincing me that I would be nothing without their approval, and in 10 seconds, I had shattered that illusion utterly. I reached the wide foyer, pulled my heavy winter coat from the hall closet, and slipped my arms into the sleeves. I wrapped my thick wool scarf around my neck and picked up my car keys from the console table. Not a single footstep followed me. Not a single voice called out to stop me or demand I return. They were paralyzed by their own profound miscalculation. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing November night. The bitter wind immediately whipped against my cheeks, biting through the fabric of my coat, but it felt incredible. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after spending a lifetime trapped in a suffocating, overheated room. I walked down the long driveway, my boots crunching rhythmically against the fresh frost. I walked right past Kevin's gleaming luxury vehicle without giving it a second glance. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, the leather seat cold against my back. I started the engine, the dashboard lighting up the dark interior with a soft, glowing warmth. Before I could even shift the transmission into reverse, my phone lit up in the center console, vibrating against the plastic cup holder. The caller ID flashed a name I had saved a long time ago. It was a call I had been waiting years to make, the first domino in a chain that my family had no idea they had just tipped over. The sun rose over Minneapolis the following morning, like a pale, frozen disk suspended in thick, gray smog. By the time I poured my first cup of black coffee, the suburban gossip network had already been fully activated. My mother wasted zero time. She possessed a terrifying talent for victimhood, and overnight she had crafted a masterpiece of fiction. According to the narrative circulating through our extended relatives, I was no longer a working professional, protecting her own assets. I was a heartless, jealous villain who had cruelly abandoned her older sibling in his darkest hour of need. My phone began buzzing relentlessly against the granite kitchen counter. Text notifications appeared one after another in rapid succession. Cousins I had not spoken to since high school suddenly felt compelled to express their deep disappointment. Family friends sent long, unsolicited paragraphs detailing the supreme importance of kinship and loyalty. The crown jewel of this orchestrated harassment campaign arrived via a voicemail from Aunt Carol. Carol was my father's older sister, a woman whose entire identity revolved around organizing country club charity galas while judging everyone who wore last season's designer shoes. She wielded her religious beliefs like a blunt instrument, using faith to justify her staggering prejudice. I pressed play on her message, letting the audio fill my quiet apartment. "Rebecca, dear?" Her voice echoed from the small speaker, dripping with a sickeningly sweet, fake concern. "Your mother called me this morning in tears. I am just so devastated to hear how you treated your parents last night. Kevin is such a good boy, and he is trying so hard to find his path. I am praying for your cold heart, sweetie. I truly hope you realize that money is not everything. We are all just so worried about your spiritual health." I deleted the audio file. I did not type out a furious reply outlining Kevin's actual financial irresponsibility. I did not take a screenshot of the ridiculous spreadsheet they had tried to force upon me. I simply placed the mobile device into my leather tote bag and walked out the door to start my commute. Driving into the city, I thought about the precise mechanics of a smear campaign. Growing up, I watched my parents utilize this exact strategy against anyone who crossed them. When a neighbor disputed a property line years ago, my mother slowly poisoned the local homeowner association against the poor woman until she eventually moved away. They operated through whispers, polite smiles, and perfectly timed sighs of distress. The local culture provided the perfect camouflage for their venom. Now, that same well-oiled machine was pointed directly at my reputation. I arrived at the towering glass high-rise housing my financial firm. I badged through the security turnstiles, stepped into the quiet elevator, and rode up to the 40th floor. For the next 9 hours, I did exactly what I was paid to do. I analyzed corporate mergers. I evaluated risk profiles for international tech startups. I remained focused, sharp, and utterly unfazed. Working with spreadsheets offered a profound comfort. If a company carried too much toxic debt, the ledgers reflected that reality. There was no emotion, no gaslighting, no mother crying tears to alter the mathematics. I spent my afternoon restructuring a failing portfolio, ruthlessly cutting away the unprofitable sectors. The parallels between the failing corporations I audited and my own brother were impossible to ignore. Kevin was a bad investment, a sinking ship demanding that I drown myself to keep his luxury lifestyle afloat. My colleagues saw nothing amiss. My manager praised a complex fiscal model I submitted before noon. I did not check my personal inbox once. I let the digital storm rage outside the impenetrable walls of my professional life. If you are listening to this and you have ever survived a toxic household, you know exactly how excruciating it feels when the people designated to protect you decide to destroy your character instead. It is a profound, specific type of grief. your chest tightens, your adrenaline spikes. You desperately want to scream the truth from the rooftops. You want to present your evidence to show the world the receipts proving that you are not the monster they claim you to be. It feels incredibly unfair that your abusers get to stand in the warm sunlight of public sympathy while you are cast into the freezing shadows of false accusations. But here is the most valuable lesson I ever learned about surviving narcissistic systems. Do not defend yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Engaging with their lies only validates their premise. It signals that their opinion holds power over your emotional state. A smear campaign is designed to provoke a reaction. They want you to act erratic, to lash out, to lose your temper, because your anger will then serve as the ultimate proof that their fictional narrative is correct. I chose total suffocating silence. It is the single response a manipulator never anticipates and cannot counter. By refusing to play my assigned role in their drama, I starved them of the very oxygen they needed to keep their fire burning. I did not block their numbers yet. I let them send their venom into the void, documenting their cruelty without ever offering a reply. Back in their suburban fortress, my parents and my brother interpreted my lack of retaliation as a clear admission of defeat. In their minds, my silence meant I was hiding in shame. They assumed I had realized the magnitude of my mistake and was currently suffering the agonizing sting of their banishment. The community echo chamber fed their oversized egos. Kevin undoubtedly soaked up the pity, playing the tragic victim while sipping expensive scotch he purchased on borrowed credit. My mother likely hosted impromptu luncheons, weeping into linen napkins while her friends patted her shoulder. My father was probably holding court at his golf club, boasting to his peers about teaching his ungrateful daughter a tough lesson in respect. Their confidence swelled to a dangerous, unsustainable level. They believed they had successfully isolated me, stripping away my support network to force my eventual submission. They were expecting me to crawl back, broken and contrite, ready to open my checkbook to purchase their forgiveness. They felt untouchable. That supreme arrogance blinded them to the reality of the board. They were playing a child's game while I was executing a checkmate formulated half a decade ago. The winter sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the carpet of my office. The workday was officially over. The building grew quiet as junior analysts packed up their briefcases and headed toward the elevators. I closed my laptop, organized my desk drawer, and finally retrieved my mobile device from my bag. The screen displayed 42 missed notifications from various relatives. I ignored every single one of them. I scrolled past the venomous text threads, the demanding voicemails, and the passive-aggressive social updates my cousins had posted. I bypassed the noise and opened a secure, encrypted messaging application. There was only one new, unread text waiting for me sent 5 minutes prior. It was from Helen Croft. Helen was not just any lawyer. She was a senior partner at the most prestigious estate planning firm in the state, a woman whose hourly rate made corporate executives wince. She possessed a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and entirely immune to emotional manipulation. My parents had always coveted the social cachet of retaining a firm like hers, but they had never been wealthy enough to afford the retainer. My grandmother, however, had secured Helen's services years ago to ensure her final wishes were executed flawlessly. I opened the message. The text was brief, professional, and devastatingly precise. "The paperwork is ready. I am sending them the summons." I locked the screen, slipping the phone into my coat pocket. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as I walked toward the elevator bay. Let them have their gossip. Let them enjoy their temporary victory. The real game had just begun. Reading that single text message from Helen Croft transported me back 3 years, straight into the quiet sanctuary of her downtown law office. The air in Helen's suite always smelled of expensive lemon wax aged paper and polished leather. The walls were lined with towering shelves of heavy legal volumes, muting the chaotic sounds of the city traffic 30 stories below. It was a room designed to make you feel small, but that day, it was the only place in the world where I felt protected. I sat in a high-backed mahogany chair, my hands resting in my lap, wearing a black dress. We had buried my grandmother Evelyn 2 days prior. My parents were busy hosting a lavish catered morning reception back at the Wyzetta estate, treating her funeral like a high society networking event. My father, Richard, had spent the entire weekend pacing the halls of the lake house with the tape measure, loudly discussing renovation plans for the master suite he assumed was now his. Helen sat across from me, her silver hair pulled back into a severe knot. She possessed the sharp, unblinking gaze of a predatory bird. She did not offer me platitudes or tissue boxes. She offered me the truth. Your father operates under the delusion that he is the sole heir to the Foster legacy, Helen said, her tone crisp and devoid of sentiment. He assumes your grandmother left everything to him, knowing he intends to pass the bulk of it down to Kevin. He believes he has secured his lineage. I nodded slowly, staring at the brass nameplate on her desk. He has been talking about transferring the estate deed into Kevin's name by next spring. He says Kevin needs a substantial asset to anchor his portfolio. Helen laced her fingers together, resting them on the pristine surface of her desk. Evelyn allowed him to believe whatever he needed to believe to keep her final years peaceful. But your grandmother was a remarkably observant woman, Rebecca. She saw right through Richard, and she saw exactly what they were doing to you. My breath caught in my throat. Grandmother Evelyn had been a woman forged from iron and grace. While my grandfather had inherited the initial family wealth, Evelyn was the architect who multiplied it. She managed the investments, bought the real estate, and built the empire my father merely coasted upon. She watched in quiet disapproval as Richard and Susan poured endless resources into a son who viewed their generosity as a birthright. She noticed when they bought Kevin a brand new sports car for his 16th birthday, while I rode the public transit bus through heavy snowstorms to reach my minimum wage job at a local bakery. She never intervened with shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. She bided her time. Helen slid a thick, unmarked manila folder across the smooth mahogany surface. It stopped right in front of my hands. 6 months before her passing, Evelyn retained my firm to restructure her entire estate, Helen explained, leaning back in her leather chair. We bypassed the traditional will process entirely. She established an irrevocable blind trust. The Wyzetta property, the primary investment portfolios, and the bulk of her liquid assets were transferred directly into that entity. Richard has zero claim to it. Susan has zero claim to it. Kevin is explicitly excluded. The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy protective blanket. I stared at the closed folder. Who is the beneficiary? Open it, Helen instructed. I reached out my fingertips, trembling slightly. I flipped the heavy cardstock cover open. Resting inside was a thick sheaf of legal documents. I gently pulled the top page free. It was the original deed to the Wyzetta estate, printed on heavy textured parchment that felt substantial and permanent against my skin. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, skipping down to the signature line at the bottom of the page. There, rendered in rich blue fountain pen ink, was Evelyn's handwriting. The elegant, looping cursive was rendered shaky by her failing health and advanced age, the lines tracing the painful effort it took her to hold the pen. Yet, despite the physical tremor, the signature pressed deep into the thick parchment, undeniably firm in its intent. Reading her name felt like feeling a hand reach out from the grave to pull me safely behind a reinforced shield. The designated sole beneficiary of the trust is you, Rebecca, Helen said softly, watching my reaction carefully. The estate is yours. The investments are yours. She locked it down airtight. By the time your parents realize they have been disinherited, the ink will have been dry for years. I stared at the shaky blue ink until my vision blurred. I never asked her for this, I whispered, my voice tight. Helen offered a rare, genuine smile. That is precisely why she gave it to you. She knew you would never exploit her, and she knew you possessed the financial acumen to protect what she built. She also knew your parents would eventually bleed you dry to support your brother. This trust is not just a financial inheritance, it is a fortress. Use it. The memory faded, dissolving back into the present reality of my quiet apartment living room. I sat on my sofa, staring at the encrypted message on my phone screen. The paperwork was ready. The trap was primed. I tapped the screen, dialing Helen's direct private line. She answered on the second ring, her voice just as crisp and authoritative as it had been 3 years ago. Are the documents finalized? I asked, watching the city lights flicker through my living room window. Everything is in order, Helen replied, the sound of typing echoing faintly in the background of the call. I have prepared the formal summons, but you need to brace yourself, Rebecca. When dealing with this specific brand of entitlement, the backlash will be severe. They will not accept defeat gracefully. I pulled my knees to my chest, tracing the seam of my slacks. What is their most likely countermeasure? They will fight dirty, Helen stated plainly. Richard will attempt to invalidate the trust. He will claim Evelyn lacked testamentary capacity. He will argue that she was senile, confused, or suffering from dementia when she signed the documents. He will accuse you of elder abuse, claiming you manipulated a dying woman into signing over her assets to spite your brother. A cold wave of disgust washed over me. The idea of them dragging my grandmother's brilliant, razor-sharp mind through the mud just to secure Kevin's ski trips was vile. Will a judge entertain that argument? Helen let out a low, humorless chuckle. Let them try. I have been doing this for 3 decades. I do not leave loose ends. But before we reveal our hand, we need to bring them to the table. We need to lure them out of their suburban echo chamber and into my office, where the law dictates the rules of engagement. How are we phrasing the summons? I asked. I drafted a formal notice mandating their presence for an urgent reading regarding the final disposition of Evelyn Foster's estate, Helen read from her screen. It is legally accurate yet perfectly vague. We are giving them a blank canvas. People like your father and your mother will project their own staggering greed right onto it. She was right. The smear campaign was currently in full swing. My parents believed I was cowed into submission. If they received a formal legal notice regarding the estate right now, their inflated egos would instantly jump to the most favorable conclusion. They will think you are finally turning the house over to them. I realized the sheer irony of the situation, making my pulse hum with anticipation. They will assume the reading is the final step in securing Kevin's inheritance. Exactly, Helen agreed. We are using their own hubris as bait. They will walk right through my front doors expecting a coronation. Send it, I said, my voice steady and resolute. My assistant is dropping the certified letters at the postal annex as we speak, Helen confirmed. They will receive the physical copies by tomorrow afternoon. Enjoy your evening, Rebecca. The storm hits on Thursday. The line disconnected, leaving me in the quiet calm of my apartment. I set the phone face down on the coffee table. My family had spent the last 48 hours tearing my name apart in the local community, reveling in their perceived dominance. They were sleeping soundly tonight, dreaming of lakeside renovations and limitless bank accounts. They were entirely oblivious to the legal snare closing tightly around their ankles. The certified mail carrier walked up the steps of the suburban fortress on Wednesday afternoon. My father signed for the thick manila envelope bearing the embossed seal of Helen Croft and Associates. He carried it into the kitchen, using a silver letter opener to slice through the heavy paper. My mother hovered over his shoulder as he read the formal summons, an urgent reading regarding the final disposition of the Evelyn Foster estate. Blinded by decades of unchecked entitlement, my father did not see a legal trap. He saw a white flag of surrender. He assumed my total silence over the past few days meant I had crumbled under the heavy weight of his banishment. In his rigid mind, I had called the lawyers myself to beg for a truce, intending to sign over whatever residual claims I held to the property, just to earn my way back into his good graces. He thought the scheduled meeting was a mere formality to transfer the Wayzata deed directly into his awaiting hands. My mother took this false narrative and ran with it. By Thursday morning, she had turned her social media feed into a digital victory lap. Susan loved utilizing the internet as an instrument of passive hostility, crafting updates that sounded wholesome but were laced with venom. I sat in my downtown office sipping hot green tea, scrolling through her public timeline. She posted a photograph of the Wayzata lakefront at dawn, a picture she had saved from a summer vacation years ago. The caption read, "God always rewards the faithful. So blessed to be finalizing our family legacy this week and securing generational wealth for those who truly deserve it. A mother's heart knows who respects the bloodline." She tagged Kevin in the post. She did not tag me. The local community showered the update with supportive comments. Women from her country club and members of her local charity committee left strings of praying hands and heart emojis, congratulating her on the impending windfall. They praised her strength in dealing with a difficult situation, buying into her tragic victim routine without a single doubt. But nobody celebrated quite like the golden child himself. Kevin possessed a unique talent for spending money he did not have, a skill nurtured by years of parental bailouts. Believing he was mere days away from becoming a multi-millionaire, he lost any remaining tether to reality. I found out about his latest purchase through a former college roommate who now managed a high-end jewelry boutique at the Galleria Mall. On Friday afternoon, Kevin strolled into the store acting like royalty. He demanded champagne from the sales associates and spent an hour trying on inventory. He walked out wearing a solid gold limited edition designer timepiece. The watch cost upward of $40,000. He paid for it using a fresh line of high-interest credit, leveraging his supposed future inheritance as collateral. My friend texted me that Kevin paraded through the mall with his coat sleeve deliberately rolled up despite the freezing Minnesota temperatures, making sure every passing shopper saw the heavy gold resting on his wrist. He was spending a fortune he did not possess, counting his chickens before the eggs were even laid. There is a highly specific, intoxicating satisfaction in watching arrogant people construct their own downfall. When someone has spent your entire existence making you feel small, the natural human instinct is to fight back immediately. You want to scream to correct the public record, to show them the steep cliff they are sprinting toward. Restraint is the hardest discipline to master. I watched my parents gloat to their country club friends. I watched my brother dig himself into a pit of high-interest debt that would devastate his credit score for a decade. I did not send a warning text. I did not call to clarify the true nature of the legal summons. I sat in the quiet, controlled environment of my apartment and let their delusions reach a fever pitch. Hubris is a fascinating phenomenon. It acts as a powerful anesthetic, numbing the mind to glaring danger while inflating the ego to the point of bursting. My family had gorged themselves on their own perceived superiority. I was simply letting them enjoy the lavish feast before presenting the inescapable bill. The weekend crept by at a glacial pace. I spent Saturday organizing my investment portfolios, ensuring my own financial house was in perfect order. On Sunday, I took a long, brisk walk around the frozen city lakes, letting the biting wind clear my thoughts and prepare my mind for the inevitable confrontation. Monday morning finally dawned crisp and blindingly bright. The sky was a vibrant blue, the kind of harsh winter day that hurts your eyes when the sun reflects off the snowbanks. I dressed with meticulous care. I chose a tailored charcoal suit, sharp and unyielding, treating the garments as armor, disguised as corporate attire. I fastened a simple silver watch around my wrist, grabbed my leather briefcase, and left my apartment. The drive out of the city took 45 minutes. I headed west toward the wealthy enclaves surrounding Lake Minnetonka. The dense urban architecture slowly gave way to sprawling snow-covered fields and thick clusters of towering evergreen trees. The roads narrowed as I approached the Wayzata limits. The estates out here were hidden behind wrought iron gates and long stretches of pristine woods, monuments to old money and quiet power. I turned onto the familiar private road, the tires of my sedan gripping the salted asphalt. The tall stone pillars marking the entrance to my grandmother's property loomed ahead, standing like silent sentinels in the snow. I drove through the open gates, my tires tracing the slow, sweeping curve of the long driveway. The lakeside house came into view, a breathtaking structure of dark wood and stone, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the bright winter sun. My parents' vehicles were already parked near the front steps, alongside Kevin's gleaming luxury Rover. I shifted the car into park and turned off the ignition. The engine clicked into silence. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, looking at the house that held the ghost of the only person who had ever truly loved me. I took one final deep breath, ready to face the family that had thrown me away. I walked up the wide stone steps of the Wayzata property, my boots sinking slightly into the fresh powder that had accumulated over the morning. The heavy mahogany front door was unlocked, pushing open with a faint click before I even reached for my keys. It was a glaring sign that my parents had already laid claim to the space, bypassing basic boundaries to assert their unearned dominance. I pushed the brass handle and stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside smelled of pine needles, expensive wood polish, and old money. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall of the sprawling living room, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the frozen lake surface, glittering under the harsh midday sun. Brittle branches from the ancient oak trees scratched lightly against the glass, a quiet reminder of the bitter winter winds howling just outside the insulated walls. This was a room built for hosting elite society, a cavernous space where local politicians and wealthy neighbors used to mingle over crystal flutes of champagne. As my heels clicked against the slate tiles, my eyes immediately fell upon the long oak coffee table in the center of the seating area. Grandmother Evelyn possessed a set of heavy, tarnished silver coasters. She had acquired them during a trip to Europe 50 years ago, and she always kept them stacked neatly in the far left corner of that specific table. It was a quirky, endearing habit she maintained for 4 decades. Now those precious silver discs were fanned out in a precise geometric pattern across the very center of the polished wood. Susan had rearranged them. It was a tiny, infuriating adjustment, a deliberate mark of new ownership intended to erase my grandmother from the room and stamp my mother's authority over the estate. My mother stood up from a velvet armchair the moment she heard my footsteps echoing in the foyer. She marched across the expensive Persian rug, positioning her physical body right in the center of the archway, leading into the main seating area. She wore a tailored cashmere cardigan and held a porcelain teacup like a royal scepter. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice echoing sharply through the high, vaulted ceilings. Her tone lacked any trace of the fake Midwestern warmth she used on our phone calls. This was pure territorial venom stripped of all polite pretense. "You have no right to walk into this house after the disrespectful stunt you pulled on Sunday. We are having a private legal meeting today." I stopped a few feet away from her, letting my leather briefcase rest casually against my side. I did not attempt to push past her physical blockade. I simply looked at her, observing the frantic, desperate energy radiating from her rigid posture. My father appeared from the adjacent library, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He stopped beside his wife, looking me up and down with deep, undisguised disgust. "Let her stay, Susan," my father sneered, taking a slow sip of his amber liquor. "She brought this upon herself. She wants to witness her own failure firsthand. Let her stand there and watch the adults handle the family legacy. She needs to learn the harsh consequences of turning her back on her own brother." Kevin remained seated on the plush leather sofa behind them. He propped his expensive suede shoes directly upon the pristine edge of the coffee table, a blatant sign of disrespect he never would have dared attempt while Evelyn was breathing. The thick gold watch on his wrist caught the incoming sunlight, flashing a bright, obnoxious reflection against the painted wall. Growing up, they practically worshipped Kevin. They treated his bloated corporate titles like he had cured a major disease, pouring endless funding into his extravagant habits. Meanwhile, they treated my advanced financial licenses and grueling corporate career like a trivial afterthought, a backup plan they could raid whenever the golden child stumbled. Kevin always needed an audience for his victories, and today he clearly wanted an audience for my supposed ruin. He wanted me to watch him inherit the very empire I had been cast out of. I maintained a serene, unbothered expression. I did not defend my right to enter the home. I did not point out that they were standing in a structure they did not actually own. I let their insults bounce off my charcoal suit like harmless pebbles hitting a brick wall. If you are a longtime follower of Morning Revenge, you understand the incredible power of stoicism. When toxic people try to bait you into an argument, denying them a reaction is the ultimate form of psychological control. My refusal to engage infuriated them, but their inflated egos misinterpreted my quietness as paralyzing shame. They thought I was speechless with regret, terrified of the impending legal finality. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front entryway, breaking the tense standoff. The heavy oak door swung open before anyone could walk over to answer it. Attorney Helen Croft stepped over the threshold, bringing a rush of freezing winter air into the stifling environment. She wore a long black trench coat and carried a thick, battered leather briefcase. Her presence immediately altered the atmospheric pressure in the room. She did not exude the desperate, flashy arrogance of my parents. She radiated quiet, undeniable, institutional power. Helen unbuttoned her coat, handing the heavy wool garment to a bewildered Susan without a single word of greeting, treating my mother exactly like a coat check attendant at a busy restaurant. "Good afternoon," Helen announced, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room and lingering on my father. "Everyone take a seat. We have a significant amount of legal ground to cover today, and my time is exceptionally expensive." Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to project his usual corporate dominance over the older woman. He gestured toward me with his empty glass. Helen, I hope you do not mind, but my daughter insisted on crashing this private gathering. We can have her removed if her presence violates any confidentiality protocols regarding the deed transfer. Helen walked to the head of the long seating arrangement and placed her briefcase on a mahogany side table. She unclasped the brass locks with two distinct echoing snaps. Rebecca is not crashing anything, Richard. Helen stated, her voice slicing effortlessly through his fragile bravado. Her presence here is legally mandated. We cannot proceed without her. My parents exchanged a swift, incredibly smug glance. In their distorted reality, they believed Evelyn had mandated my presence from beyond the grave to ensure I formally witnessed my own disinheritance. They thought this was a final orchestrated humiliation designed by a traditional family hierarchy to put the rebellious daughter in her proper place forever. Susan smirked, sitting back down on the velvet chair, smoothing the fabric of her cashmere sweater with a look of supreme triumph. Kevin leaned forward, rubbing his hands together in greedy anticipation, his eyes fixed on the attorney. Helen did not correct their assumptions. She let the tension stretch out, allowing their false confidence to reach its absolute zenith. The room went dead silent, the only sound the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant howling of the Minnesota wind. Helen reached into the dark interior of her open briefcase. She pulled a thick, sealed manila envelope into the sunlight. The paper was heavy and unmarked. She held it up, the sharp edges catching the light. The trap was perfectly set, the bait had been swallowed whole, and the jaws were about to snap shut. Helen Croft stood at the head of the sprawling seating arrangement and did not bother with standard pleasantries. She did not ask about the weather or inquire about my parents' recent social events. She treated the Wyzetta living room exactly like a sterile courtroom. She slid her hand into the heavy manila envelope and slowly extracted a thick stack of legal documents. The papers were bound by a dark blue cover, the seal of her law firm stamped proudly on the front. The rustle of the thick parchment seemed deafening in the quiet space. Outside, the frozen branches of the oak trees scraped against the tall glass windows, providing a tense, rhythmic soundtrack to the unfolding scene. My father sat forward on the edge of the velvet sofa, his hands resting on his knees. He looked at the blue folder with hungry, expectant eyes. "Let us cut to the chase," Helen Richard said, his tone dripping with unearned authority. "Susan and I have a charity dinner to attend this evening. We just need to know where I signed to finalize the deed transfer. Kevin is eager to start reviewing the property lines." Helen did not look up from her paperwork. She smoothed the pages flat against the mahogany side table, her expression carved from solid ice. "You will not be signing anything today, Richard," she stated, her voice calm but carrying a sharp, unmistakable edge. "Your signature is neither required nor relevant to the disposition of these assets." The smug, self-satisfied smile on my mother's face flickered, replaced by a brief twitch of confusion. Susan glanced at my father, expecting him to correct the attorney. Richard frowned his thick eyebrows, pulling together in a harsh line. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, a hint of genuine irritation bleeding into his voice. "My mother passed away. I am her only son. I am the executor of her estate." "You were the executor of her standard will," Helen corrected, finally raising her eyes to meet his gaze. "But her standard will is a worthless piece of paper. It governs nothing but her personal clothing and a few minor pieces of costume jewelry. The actual wealth of Evelyn Foster does not exist within the boundaries of probate court." Helen picked up a silver fountain pen from her briefcase, holding it between her slender fingers. "5 years ago, your mother retained my firm to execute a comprehensive restructuring of her financial portfolio. She recognized certain destructive dynamics within this family, and she took decisive legal action to protect the empire she built alongside her late husband." Kevin stopped rubbing his hands together. His expensive suede shoes slipped off the edge of the coffee table, planting firmly on the rug. The greedy anticipation in his eyes shifted into a wary, guarded confusion. Helen looked directly at the documents and began to read aloud, her diction flawless and unyielding. "Acting upon the explicit instructions of my client, our firm established a blind, irrevocable trust. This legal entity was fully funded and executed 36 months prior to her passing. By definition, an irrevocable trust cannot be altered, amended, or contested by surviving relatives. It is a locked vault. I watched my family process the terminology. As a financial analyst, I understood the sheer, impenetrable power of the legal instrument Helen was describing. My father understood it too. A dark shadow of realization began to creep across his features. Pursuant to the terms of the trust, Helen continued projecting her voice to ensure every single syllable registered with the people sitting in front of her. 100% of the designated assets were transferred out of Evelyn Foster's individual name and placed under the protection of this entity. This includes all liquid capital, the diverse stock portfolios, the offshore investment accounts, and the physical deed to this lakeside property in Wayzata. Susan let out a shaky, nervous breath. "But Richard is the heir," she interrupted, her voice lacking its usual commanding volume. "It all passes down to Richard, and then to Kevin. That is how a family legacy operates." "That is how a dynasty operates in a historical novel," Susan Helen shot back, shutting my mother down with effortless precision. "In the real world, the assets belong exclusively to the named beneficiary." Helen flipped to the third page of the document. She traced her silver pen down a dense paragraph of legal phrasing. "I will now read the beneficiary designation exactly as it was mandated by the grantor. The trust in its entirety, including all real estate holdings and financial instruments, is hereby transferred immediately and in perpetuity to the sole designated beneficiary." Helen paused. She looked up, her piercing gaze moving past my parents to lock onto me. Rebecca Foster Helen announced the name, echoing into the high, vaulted ceilings. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed to breathe. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Helen lowered her gaze back to the parchment, refusing to let them escape the full, devastating reality of the legal snare. Furthermore, the grantor included specific exclusion clauses. It reads as follows: "I intentionally and with full clarity of mind exclude my son, Richard Foster, my daughter-in-law, Susan Foster, and my grandson, Kevin Foster, from receiving any portion, benefit, or access to the assets held within this trust. They are to receive nothing." Helen pressed the tip of her silver fountain pen against the bottom of the page right next to my grandmother's shaky blue signature. She clicked the top of the pen. Click. The sharp metallic sound shattered the frozen silence of the room. It was a tiny noise, but it landed with the force of a detonating bomb. Kevin was the first to fully comprehend the mathematics of his own destruction. I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He looked down at his own wrist, staring at the $40,000 gold designer watch he had purchased just 3 days ago. The high-interest credit line he used to buy it was due in less than a month. He had a luxury mortgage payment pending. He had a premium auto lease. He had zero income, zero prospects, and he had just been informed that his guaranteed millions were a phantom illusion. The realization hit him so hard, his shoulders physically slumped forward. The golden child was entirely, undeniably broke. Susan began to shake her head, her perfectly styled hair trembling with the rapid movement. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind outside. "No, that cannot be correct. You read it wrong, Helen. It is a mistake. It has to be a clerical error. Evelyn would never give a multi-million dollar estate to the girl. She meant Kevin. The names were swapped." "There are no clerical errors in my office," Helen replied coldly. The document was read, verified, and notarized in the presence of 3 independent witnesses. Evelyn was remarkably lucid. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew who deserved the house, and she knew who would squander it. The sheer magnitude of the loss finally settled over my father. His smug, patriarchal arrogance evaporated, replaced by a hollow, staggering shock. For his entire adult life, Richard had paraded around the country club, treating this estate as his inevitable birthright. He had banished me from his dining room just 1 week ago, using this very property as a weapon to force my submission. He had demanded I pay for his son's failures, threatening to lock me out of the family wealth if I refused. Now sitting on a velvet sofa in a house he did not own, he realized the ultimate humiliating truth. He was not the lord of the manor. He was a trespasser sitting in his daughter's living room. The shock quickly curdled into something much darker. The deep purple hue I had seen at the dining room table returned to Richard's face, crawling up his neck and consuming his cheeks. His jaw clamped shut, the muscles grinding together with terrifying intensity. Richard grabbed the padded armrests of his chair. He pushed himself upward, sending the heavy piece of furniture skidding backward across the expensive Persian rug. He stood at his full height, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths, his eyes burning with an unhinged, desperate rage as the reality of his total defeat finally set in. The polite veneer of Midwestern charm evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal hostility. My father leaned over the expensive rug, pointing a thick, trembling finger directly at Helen Croft. His voice, usually a controlled boardroom baritone, fractured into a deafening roar. "This is a fabrication," he bellowed the sound, reverberating off the high ceilings and rattling the window panes. "You are committing fraud in my mother's home. You manipulated a sick elderly woman into signing over her legacy to justify billing an exorbitant hourly rate. I will report you to the State Bar Association. I will have your license revoked for malpractice." Helen did not flinch. She did not raise her voice to match his volume. She merely observed him with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction. "Your threats are as hollow as your legal standing, Richard," she replied, her tone dipping into a chillingly calm register. "The documents are ironclad. You are shouting at a brick wall." Kevin could no longer sit still. The crushing weight of his impending financial ruin propelled him off the leather sofa. He began to pace frantically across the Persian rug, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive cut. He muttered under his breath, calculating the ruinous mathematics of his lifestyle, the luxury car lease, the impending credit card bills, the country club dues. He was a man watching his entire fate kingdom collapse into dust. As Kevin turned on his heel to pace back toward the fireplace, his elbow clipped the edge of the mahogany side table. A ceramic coffee mug, left over from my mother's morning routine, tipped over the edge. It struck the hardwood floor and shattered. The sharp, explosive crack of breaking ceramic pierced the heavy tension. Shards of porcelain scattered across the polished wood, a stark physical manifestation of the family illusion breaking apart forever. The sudden noise triggered a profound shift in my mother. Susan had spent her entire adult life curating a pristine image of maternal grace and suburban perfection. She hosted charity galas, she baked casseroles, she wore pearls, and she smiled through every perceived slight. But staring at the shattered pieces of her favorite mug, alongside the shattered ruins of her guaranteed wealth, her polished exterior shattered as well. She did not weep out of grief for my grandmother. She did not mourn the loss of the estate. She broke down out of pure, unadulterated spite. Susan turned her gaze toward me, her eyes burning with a toxic, unfiltered hatred I had always felt but never truly seen laid bare. Her chest heaved, the cashmere cardigan pulling tight across her shoulders. "You planned this?" my mother shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams, stripping away any lingering trace of regional politeness. "You sneaked behind our backs and poisoned Evelyn against us? You have always been a manipulative, calculating snake, Rebecca. Always sitting in the corner, judging us, acting like you were so much better than this family." I remained seated, my hands resting loosely in my lap. I did not interrupt her. I let the venom flow, knowing that toxic individuals inevitably expose their own darkest motivations when cornered. "You want to know why we poured everything into your brother?" Susan demanded, stepping closer, her face contorted with bitter resentment. "You want to know why we never celebrated your little corporate promotions or your fancy financial licenses? Because you never needed us. From the time you were 10 years old, you walked around acting like you could run your own life. You paid for your own college, you bought your own car, you moved into the city and never asked for a single favor." She spat the words out as if my independence was a terminal disease. "Kevin needed me," Susan cried, gesturing wildly toward my brother, who was now staring at her in stunned silence. "When Kevin failed a class, he came to me. When he ruined his credit, he asked for my help. He allowed me to be a mother. He gave me a purpose. Every time he stumbled, it proved that he belonged in this house. But you, Rebecca, you looked at our money and our connections like they were beneath you. Your self-sufficiency was a constant, arrogant insult. You made me feel useless in my own home. So yes, I wanted to give him the lake house. I wanted to reward the child who actually loved me enough to need me. There it was, the ugly, unvarnished truth dragged out into the bright winter sunlight. If you are listening to this, pay very close attention to what just happened. When dealing with narcissistic abuse, the ultimate sin you can commit is outgrowing your need for the abuser. My mother did not love Kevin more because he was a better person. She favored him because his chronic incompetence fed her fragile ego. She required a dependent, helpless subject to feel powerful. My quiet capability, my ability to survive without their financial umbilical cord, terrified her. It rendered her control tactics obsolete. By refusing to need them, I had inadvertently committed an unforgivable offense. Watching her unravel, I felt an incredible sense of liberation. For 3 decades, I had wondered what internal flaw made me so unlovable to my own parents. I had agonized over my grades, my career, my choices, constantly trying to solve the impossible puzzle of their affection. In a single hysterical monologue, Susan handed me the missing piece. The problem was never my inadequacy. The problem was my strength. I was punished for surviving them. I did not offer a rebuttal. I did not scream back. I just looked at her, my silence acting as a mirror reflecting her profound ugliness right back into her own eyes. My father stepped in front of Susan, shielding her from my unbothered stare. His initial shock had fully transformed into a cold, calculating hostility. He turned his attention back to the attorney, ignoring my presence entirely. "You think you can waltz into my family home and hand my legacy over to this ungrateful girl?" Richard snarled, stepping into Helen's personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate her. Helen Croft did not retreat a single inch. She looked down at the shattered coffee mug on the floor, then slowly raised her gaze to meet my father's furious eyes. Her expression was carved from glacial ice. "Let me clarify your current geographical reality," Richard Helen stated, her voice dropping to a dangerous, precise whisper. "You are not standing in your family home. You are standing in a property owned exclusively by my client. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the utility bills. You have zero legal right to occupy this space. If you do not lower your voice and step back this instant, I will dial the local authorities and have you physically removed from Rebecca's property for criminal trespassing." The threat hit my father like a bucket of freezing water. The Wayzata police force was largely funded by the wealthy residents of the lakefront community. Richard regularly golfed with the chief of police. The sheer, humiliating prospect of being dragged out of the estate in handcuffs paraded in front of his elite neighbors like a common vandal forced him to swallow his immediate rage. He stepped back, his chest rising and falling heavily. He straightened his tailored collar, attempting to salvage some shred of his shattered dignity. He realized physical intimidation would not work against a seasoned litigator, so he pivoted to the only weapon he had left. "You think this is over?" Richard hissed, his voice vibrating with a toxic promise. "You think a single piece of paper is going to strip me of what I am owed? You underestimated my resources, Helen. I will hire the best litigation firm in the Midwest. I will file an injunction tomorrow morning. I will challenge the testamentary capacity of my mother. I will tie this estate up in probate court for a decade if I have to. I will bleed this trust dry with legal fees until there is nothing left but dust. You hear me, Rebecca? You will never spend a single dime of that money." The ultimate threat had been issued. The battle lines were drawn. The antagonist believed he still held the power to destroy my future through endless grinding litigation. He was entirely confident that his wealth and influence could break the ironclad snare we had constructed. He had no idea that Helen Croft was already holding the exact key designed to permanently lock him out. Richard's promise to drag the estate through probate court hung in the air, a toxic cloud, threatening to smother the room. He breathed heavily, his chest puffing out, fueled by the delusion that his vast corporate resources could bully the legal system into submission. He envisioned endless depositions, frozen assets, and a war of attrition that would force me to surrender. Helen Croft did not blink. She simply smiled. It was a tight, razor-thin expression that did not reach her eyes. She looked at my father not as a formidable adversary, but as a tedious nuisance who had fundamentally misunderstood the rules of the game. "Litigation requires a vulnerable target," Richard Helen said, her voice dropping to a smooth conversational cadence. "You assume your mother acted on a whim, signing away her fortune in a haze of senility. You believe a judge will look at an elderly woman's signature and grant you an injunction based on your tearful testimony of elder manipulation." Helen reached back into the dark interior of her weathered briefcase. She bypassed the standard document slots and opened a secondary, reinforced compartment. "Evelyn Foster was many things," Helen continued, withdrawing a remarkably dense bound stack of papers. "But she was never naive. She knew her son. She anticipated this exact temper tantrum half a decade before you even threw it. She knew you would attempt to weaponize the judicial system to steal what she denied you. So we built a fortress around the deed." Helen raised her hand, holding the hefty bundle of documents, and let it fall. Thud. The heavy impact of the thick medical file striking the solid oak coffee table sent a shockwave through the tense atmosphere. The sharp noise caused Susan to jump in her seat, her hands flying to her throat. The imposing stack of paper sat right next to the scattered, broken shards of the ceramic mug. "What is that?" my father demanded, his blustering tone faltering for the first time, replaced by a thread of genuine apprehension. "That is your insurmountable barrier," Helen replied, tapping the cover of the file with her silver pen. "Inside this folder are 3 separate comprehensive psychological evaluations. They were conducted precisely during the month the trust was formed." My father stared at the file as if it were a venomous serpent. Helen began listing the credentials with surgical precision. The first evaluation was performed by a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist, the second by a leading clinical neurologist from the Mayo Clinic, the third by an independent forensic psychologist who specializes in testamentary capacity. All 3 specialists subjected your mother to rigorous cognitive testing, including memory assessments, reasoning puzzles, and spatial awareness exams. Helen paused, letting the crushing weight of the medical expertise settle over the room. All 3 physicians concluded under oath and via notarized affidavits that Evelyn Foster possessed a pristine, unimpaired mental state, Helen stated, twisting the metaphorical knife. They swore she understood the exact nature of her assets, she understood the natural objects of her bounty, and she harbored a clear, uncoerced intent to disinherit you. Those medical professionals are ready to testify in court. Their depositions are pre-recorded. The color drained entirely from Richard's cheeks. The flushed, angry hue vanished, leaving behind a pale, sickly gray. His grand strategy of proving his mother was a confused, manipulated victim had just been preemptively annihilated by an impenetrable wall of medical evidence. "Furthermore," Helen added, clasping her hands together, "the trust agreement contains a titanium-clad fee-shifting penalty provision. It is a strict no-contest mechanism designed to deter frivolous litigation. If you attempt to file an injunction, the presiding judge will review these medical files and dismiss your case with prejudice during the preliminary hearing. And under the terms of the trust, you will be held personally liable for every single penny of Rebecca's legal defense costs." Helen leaned forward, her eyes locking onto my father's defeated posture. "You will not bleed this trust dry, Richard. You will only drain your own retirement accounts, paying my hourly rate to watch a judge laugh you out of the courtroom. You have 0 legal standing. The checkmate happened 5 years ago." The room descended into a suffocating, terrifying silence. The reality of their total powerlessness crashed over them like a tidal wave. There would be no endless lawsuits. There would be no settlements. There would be no victory. They were locked out permanently and undeniably. Then, the fragile alliance of the Golden Child and his enablers spectacularly imploded. Kevin had remained eerily quiet during the legal exchange, his eyes darting between the thick medical file on the table and the heavy gold timepiece strapped to his wrist. The luxurious watch purchased just days prior on a high-interest credit line suddenly transformed from a status symbol into a ticking time bomb. He was drowning in debt, relying entirely on the safety net his parents had guaranteed him. That net had just been incinerated. Kevin stood up, his face contorted into a mask of pure panic and vicious betrayal. He turned his back on me and rounded on his own mother and father. "You told me it was handled." Kevin shrieked, his voice cracking, shedding all pretense of his suave, sophisticated persona. "You sat in my living room last week and promised me the Wyzetta estate was mine. You told me I did not need to worry about the mortgage. You told me the inheritance would cover the Aspen trip and the Rover lease." Susan reached out her hands, trembling, trying to soothe her frantic son. "Kevin, sweetheart, please calm down. We will figure this out. We can pull from our savings to help you." Kevin slapped her hands away. The harsh, dismissive gesture made Susan gasp in horror. "Pull from your savings," Kevin spat, his eyes wide and wild. "Your savings cannot even cover my overdue taxes. You lied to me. You made me think we were rich. I just charged $40,000 to a new car because you swore the money was secure." My father tried to intervene, puffing up his chest to regain control of his air. "Do not speak to your mother that way, Kevin. We are victims of a sophisticated scam. We are on the same side." "We are not on the same side," Kevin roared, taking a step toward Richard, his fists clenched at his sides. "You are weak. You let an old woman and a junior analyst steal my future right out from under you. What kind of father lets his son face bankruptcy while his sister gets a multi-million-dollar lake house? You promised to protect me. You are useless." The scene unfolding before me was profoundly tragic and deeply satisfying. The toxic ecosystem they had cultivated for 3 decades was finally eating itself alive. Susan began to weep loudly, burying her face in her hands, devastated by the vicious rejection of the son she had idolized. Richard stood paralyzed, unable to command respect from the boy he had spoiled into a monster. Kevin paced like a caged animal, hurling insults at the people who had sacrificed everything for his comfort. Their loyalty was entirely transactional. The moment the funding dried up, the unconditional family love they had preached so passionately vanished into thin air. They were tearing each other apart over money, exposing the hollow, rotting core of their relationships. I sat on the velvet armchair, feeling a strange, profound sense of detachment. I did not feel the urge to intervene. I did not feel a shred of pity. I simply watched the inevitable consequence of unchecked entitlement play out in real time. They had demanded I set myself on fire to keep Kevin warm. Now they were all burning in the flames of their own making. I placed my hands on the armrests and slowly pushed myself upward. The movement drew their attention. The screaming match abruptly halted. Kevin, Susan, and Richard turned to look at me, their faces stained with tears, fury, and naked desperation. They looked like strangers, small and pathetic, standing in the ruins of their own hubris. I smoothed the front of my charcoal suit blazer, picking up my leather briefcase from the floor. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The quiet authority of my tone commanded the entire room. "This meeting is over," I announced, my words cutting through the lingering tension like a scythe. "You have exhausted your welcome, and you have exhausted my patience." I checked the simple silver watch on my wrist, noting the precise position of the hands. "It is currently 2:15 in the afternoon," I said, looking directly into my father's defeated eyes, then shifting my gaze to my sobbing mother, and finally resting on my terrified brother. "You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your coats, exit the front door, and remove your vehicles from my driveway. If anyone is still standing on this property at 2:25, Helen will make that phone call to the local police department." The 10-minute countdown hung in the stifling air of the living room, like a heavy iron pendulum. I did not repeat my demand. I simply stood near the mahogany side table, holding my leather briefcase, projecting a quiet, unyielding authority. Helen Croft broke the frozen tableau. She reached out, gathered her legal documents, and slid them back into her weathered briefcase. She fastened the brass latches with 2 crisp, definitive snaps. The sharp sound seemed to break the hypnotic trance holding my family hostage. Helen buttoned her dark trench coat, wrapped her scarf around her neck, and walked past my parents without offering a single parting glance. She gave me a brief, respectful nod, pushing the front door open and stepping out into the frigid Minnesota afternoon. Her departure signaled the end of the legal proceedings. The only thing left was the physical reality of the eviction. Richard moved first. The patriarch, who had spent his entire adulthood treating this sprawling lakeside estate as his personal kingdom, now shuffled toward the coat closet like a defeated trespasser. His shoulders, usually pulled back in a posture of corporate dominance, slumped forward. His hands visibly shook as he reached for his expensive wool overcoat. He missed the sleeve twice, his coordination betrayed by the staggering adrenaline crash following his ultimate humiliation. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes glued to the slate tiles of the foyer, stripped of his arrogance, reduced to a hollow shell of a man. Susan followed close behind him, her movements erratic and uncoordinated. Her mascara had smudged beneath her eyes, leaving dark, messy streaks across her pale cheeks. The pristine cashmere cardigan she wore suddenly looked oversized and ridiculous on her trembling frame. She reached out, attempting to grasp my father's arm for physical support, but Richard shrugged her off. The toxic alliance they had maintained for decades was crumbling under the immense pressure of their shared ruin. Kevin was the last to move. He stood near the shattered remains of the ceramic coffee mug, his chest heaving. He glared at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered panic. He had just realized that there would be no secret bailout, no hidden trust fund, no parental rescue mission. He was an unemployed man drowning in luxury debt, and the safety net had just been incinerated. He opened his mouth, perhaps intending to hurl one final insult or plead for a momentary loan, but the dead, emotionless stare I offered him froze the words in his throat. He turned on his heel, grabbed his designer jacket, and stomped toward the exit. I followed them to the entryway. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I did not offer any parting words of advice or mock their profound downfall. Gloating is a symptom of insecurity, a desperate need to prove your victory to the vanquished. True power resides in silence. I simply watched them leave, enforcing the boundary with my physical presence. They stepped out onto the wide stone porch. The brutal winter wind immediately whipped around them, tearing at their coats and biting into their exposed skin. The temperature had dropped significantly since the morning, the pale sun offering zero warmth. I stood on the threshold, letting the freezing draft sweep into the foyer, cleansing the house of their stifling, oppressive energy. I watched Kevin climb into his gleaming luxury Rover. He slammed the driver's side door so hard the heavy frame rattled. He started the engine, the exhaust pipe billowing thick white smoke into the frigid air. He threw the vehicle into reverse, tires spinning wildly on the salted asphalt, before catching traction. He sped down the long, winding driveway, fleeing the scene of his destroyed future. Richard and Susan climbed into their sedan in total silence. There was no argument, no discussion of strategy, only the grim, suffocating realization of their new reality. The brake lights illuminated the snowbanks as my father shifted gears. They drove away at a creeping, cautious pace, retreating to a suburban home they would soon have to leverage just to cover their golden child's impending bankruptcy. I waited until their vehicle disappeared beyond the tall stone pillars marking the property line. Then I stepped backward into the grand foyer. I grasped the handle of the heavy, solid oak front door and pushed it shut. The thick wood sealed perfectly against the weather stripping, instantly cutting off the howling sound of the winter wind. I reached up and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. Click. The loud metallic sound echoed through the cavernous, empty entryway. It was a simple mechanical function, but in that specific moment, it represented the most profound transition of my entire life. That sharp click was the sound of a generational cycle breaking. It was the sound of the umbilical cord being severed permanently. The fortress was secured, and the intruders were locked outside. I leaned my back against the sturdy oak door, closing my eyes. The house was incredibly quiet. It was not the tense, suffocating silence that follows a screaming match. It was a clean, pristine stillness. The lingering scent of my mother's heavy floral perfume was already dissipating, replaced by the natural, comforting aroma of aged wood pine needles and the crisp winter air that had rushed into the hall. Before I could even take a full breath, a sharp vibration rattled against the surface of the mahogany console table. My mobile phone was dancing across the polished wood, the screen lighting up the dim corner of the foyer. I walked over and looked at the caller identification. It was Susan. The initial shock of the eviction had apparently worn off during her drive back to the city, replaced by a desperate, calculated panic. Having realized that rage and intimidation held zero power over me, my mother was rapidly shifting her tactics. She was deploying her final, most insidious weapon: guilt. I let the phone ring until it diverted to voicemail. A few seconds later, a flurry of text messages began populating my lock screen. Rebecca, please pick up the phone, the first message read. We need to talk about this as a family. We can heal from this, the second text appeared. Do not throw your own mother and father away over a piece of property. Family unity is more important than money. We forgive you for the misunderstanding today. Call me back. I stared at the glowing pixels. The sheer, staggering delusion required to type those words was breathtaking. Just 10 minutes ago, she was screaming that she hated my independence. My father had threatened to bleed me dry in court. Now, because they were standing on the losing side of the battlefield, they were attempting to rewrite history, framing my self-defense as a mere misunderstanding that required mutual forgiveness. They were trying to lure me back into the fog of their manipulation. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. I did not read the rest of her paragraphs. I did not compose a response detailing their hypocrisy. I tapped the small icon in the top right corner of her contact profile. Block this caller. I confirmed the selection. I navigated to my father's contact information. Block this caller. I pulled up Kevin's number. Block this caller. I moved methodically through my digital directory, erecting an impenetrable digital wall to match the physical deadbolt on my front door. In less than 60 seconds, I severed their access to my life. They could scream into the void, they could weep to their country club friends, but they would never again have the privilege of delivering their venom directly into my hands. I set the silenced phone back down on the console table. I walked out of the foyer and moved through the sprawling, sunlit rooms of the Wayzata estate. I entered the expansive kitchen, tracing my fingers along the cool granite countertops. I opened the built-in wine refrigerator hidden beneath the center island. Grandmother Evelyn had always maintained a stellar collection of vintage reds. I selected a bottle of dry Cabernet, uncorked it, and poured a generous measure into a crystal glass. I carried the wine into the main living room. The shards of the broken ceramic mug still littered the floor near the side table. I stepped carefully around the debris, deciding to leave the mess for tomorrow. I walked over to the massive stone fireplace dominating the far wall. I arranged a few dry birch logs on the iron grate, struck a long wooden match, and watched the dry bark catch fire. The flames crackled and popped, casting a warm, flickering glow across the expensive Persian rug. I sank into the deep plush cushions of the velvet armchair. I took a slow sip of the Cabernet. The rich, complex flavor coated my tongue, a stark contrast to the bitter taste of the family dinner I had endured just 48 hours ago. I sat alone by the fire and took a deep, unrestrained breath. For the first time in 32 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of my parents' expectations pressing down on my chest. I did not feel the nagging anxiety of anticipating my brother's next catastrophic failure. I was entirely alone, and I was entirely safe. The immediate crisis was over, the physical confrontation had been won, and the legal trap had snapped shut with flawless precision. But as I watched the flames consume the birchwood, I knew the war was far from finished. Narcissists do not simply fade quietly into the background when they are defeated. Denied access to their primary target, they turn their destructive energy outward. The social fallout was just beginning, and the golden child, stripped of his funding and facing imminent bankruptcy, was about to become extremely desperate. 14 days evaporated into the crisp December air, bringing an unprecedented, unbroken tranquility to my daily routine. The sprawling Wayzata estate transformed from a battleground into a genuine sanctuary. I spent my evenings restoring the original fixtures, reading by the stone fireplace, and enjoying the profound stillness that accompanies true independence. My digital boundaries held firm. The blocked numbers ensured my mobile device remained silent, filtering out the desperate noise of my former family. I focused my energy entirely on my career, dissecting market trends and structuring portfolios with a sharpened, unburdened mind. But a fortress is only tested when the enemy attempts a siege. The reality of unchecked debt moves at a terrifying velocity. While I drank vintage wine by the lake, the creditors were undoubtedly circling my brother. The confrontation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the break room on the 40th floor of my corporate firm, pouring a cup of dark roast coffee, when the internal communication system chimed. The receptionist from the ground floor lobby was on the line. Her tone sounded tight, laced with professional alarm. Miss Foster, there is a gentleman at the front reception desk demanding to speak with you. He bypassed the initial visitor screening checkpoint. He claims it is a medical family emergency, but he is refusing to provide his identification to the security team. My pulse maintained its steady, even rhythm. A medical emergency was the classic final play in the Manipulator Handbook, a manufactured crisis designed to force immediate contact. Tell the guards to hold him at the turnstiles I instructed. Setting my ceramic mug on the counter, I will be right down. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy blazer, stepped into the glass elevator, and descended to the main atrium. The lobby of my firm was a sprawling expanse of polished white marble chrome pillars and towering modern art installations. It was a space engineered to project vast institutional wealth and sterile efficiency. As the elevator doors parted, I spotted the disturbance immediately. Standing near the magnetic security gates, flanked by two imposing men in dark uniforms, was the former Golden Child. 2 weeks ago, Kevin had lounged in a velvet chair wearing pristine cashmere, a $70,000 vehicle parked outside, radiating unearned superiority. The man standing in the lobby today looked like a ghost haunting his own life. The visual decline was staggering. He wore a charcoal suit, but the fabric was deeply wrinkled, creased in ways that suggested he had slept in the garments for multiple nights. A dark, questionable stain marred the left lapel. His usually immaculate hair hung limp and unwashed across his forehead. The expensive suede shoes he prized so highly were scuffed and stained with gray street salt. The heavy, limited edition gold designer watch was noticeably absent from his wrist, likely pawned or seized to cover a fraction of his mounting arrears. He spotted me approaching and immediately pushed against the security barrier. "Rebecca," he called out, his voice cracking, echoing thinly across the cavernous marble hall. "Thank God! Tell these guards to let me through. I need to talk to you right now." I did not wave the guards away. I stopped a few feet short of the turnstiles, keeping the physical glass barrier firmly between us. "There is no medical emergency, Kevin," I stated, observing his disheveled appearance with clinical detachment. "You are trespassing in a private commercial building. State your business, or I will authorize these men to remove you." The harsh, uncompromising boundary knocked the wind out of him. He looked around the lobby, noticing the well-dressed executives and visiting clients pausing to watch the spectacle. His shoulders sagged, and the frantic energy dissolved into a theatrical display of profound misery. He leaned against the glass partition, his eyes growing red-rimmed and damp. "Please," he whispered, forcing a wet, pathetic tremor into his vocal cords. "I have nowhere else to go. My bank accounts are frozen. The dealership repossessed the Rover this morning while I was sleeping. I cannot even buy groceries." He reached a trembling hand across the barrier, aiming for my sleeve. I took a deliberate step backward, keeping my personal space untouched. "It is all their fault," Kevin whimpered, hot tears spilling over his lower eyelids, tracking through the faint stubble on his cheeks. "Mom and Dad ruined me. They raised me to expect a certain lifestyle. They promised me the world, and then they left me to drown when the money disappeared. They are crazy, Rebecca. You were right about them all along. We are the only sane ones left. We are siblings. We grew up in the same toxic house. We have to stick together to survive them." It was a masterful, sickening pivot. Having realized that our parents were no longer a viable source of infinite funding, he was attempting to switch allegiances. He tried to rewrite our entire history, framing himself as a fellow victim of their narcissism, hoping to bond with me over shared trauma. He wanted to weaponize my own painful childhood to extract a payout. "I need a bridge loan," he begged, his voice dropping to a desperate, breathless pitch. "Just $50,000 to clear the immediate defaults and secure a modest apartment. It is pocket change for you. Now you have the entire Wyzetta Trust. You can save my life right now. Please, little sister, I am begging you." I evaluated his emotional display the exact same way I reviewed a high-risk municipal bond. I searched the ledger of his tears for underlying value, looking for genuine remorse, accountability, or self-awareness. I found zero equity. I found only toxic liabilities and calculated manipulation. He was not crying because he regretted treating me like dirt for 32 years. He was crying because he had run out of victims to exploit. I opened the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. I had anticipated this exact ambush since the moment the legal doors slammed shut. I pulled out a single, crisp sheet of printer paper. Kevin wiped his nose on his wrinkled sleeve, his eyes tracking the movement. A spark of greedy hope ignited in his damp eyes. He assumed I was retrieving a corporate checkbook or drafting a promissory note. He believed his performance had successfully breached my defenses. I extended my arm over the glass turnstile, holding the document between my index and middle fingers. He snatched it, eagerly unfolding the paper with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the printed text, the spark of hope extinguished, replaced by a hollow, sickening confusion. "This is not a check," he stammered, staring at the page. "No," I replied, my voice steady, cool, and devoid of any sisterly affection. "That is a curated list of the top insolvency attorneys in Hennepin County. I highlighted the firms that specialize in Chapter 7 and Chapter 11 bankruptcy filings. Several of them offer free initial consultations. Since you are currently unemployed and carrying unmanageable unsecured debt, I highly recommend you call the first number on that list before your creditors begin garnishing your future wages." Kevin stared at the printed names, his brain struggling to process the rejection. "You are handing me a directory," he whispered, the wet tremor in his voice hardening into something sharp and dangerous. "I am handing you the only piece of financial advice you will ever receive from me," I corrected. The fragile, tragic victim persona shattered into a million jagged pieces. The tears dried instantly on his cheeks, evaporating under the heat of his sudden, venomous rage. The mask slipped, revealing the exact same entitled bully who used to smirk at my struggles across the dining room table. "You owe me," Kevin roared, his face contorting into an ugly, snarling mask. The sound tore through the quiet elegance of the corporate lobby, freezing the passing executives in their tracks. He crumpled the list of attorneys in his fist, hurling the crushed paper over the glass barrier. It bounced harmlessly off my shoulder and landed on the marble floor. "You stole my inheritance!" he shrieked, slamming both of his fists against the security turnstile. The metal housing rattled under the impact. "That lake house belongs to me. You are nothing but a jealous, calculating thief. You think you are so superior sitting in your high tower, but you are just a miserable, lonely spinster who had to trick a dying woman into leaving you a dime. Give me my money." His tantrum was spectacular, an unrestrained explosion of thwarted privilege. He kicked the glass partition, screaming profanities, his face red and slick with sweat. He was throwing a toddler-level fit in the center of a Fortune 500 financial institution, proving exactly why he could not hold down a job in a professional environment. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I did not attempt to defend my character or explain the nuances of the legal trust to the growing crowd of onlookers. Engaging with an unhinged narcissist in a public forum only serves to drag you down into their chaotic mud. I looked past my screaming brother and caught the eye of the head security guard standing to his left. I gave a single subtle nod of my chin. The guards moved with swift, tactical precision. They stepped forward, flanking Kevin on both sides. They firmly clamped their heavy hands onto his shoulders, halting his physical assault on the building infrastructure. Kevin thrashed against their grip, twisting his torso and kicking his scuffed suede shoes at their shins, but he lacked the physical strength to break their trained hold. "Get your hands off me!" he hollered, his voice cracking in sheer panic as they spun him around. "Do you know who I am?" The guards did not care who he thought he was. They marched him forcefully across the vast expanse of the marble atrium, their boots echoing in unison. Kevin dragged his heels, fighting the entire way, hurling desperate, incoherent threats over his shoulder. The lobby doors automatically parted, sensing their approach. I stood behind the glass partition and watched as they shoved him through the exit. He stumbled out onto the freezing, salt-stained pavement of the city street. The heavy glass doors slid shut, sealing the frigid winter air and his frantic screams outside the building. I bent down, retrieved the crumpled ball of paper from the pristine marble floor, and tossed it into a nearby recycling receptacle. The immediate spectacle was over, and the golden child had been formally discarded. However, exposing a fraud in public always carries secondary consequences. As the truth of his financial ruin inevitably leaked into the suburban gossip network, the hypocrites who had eagerly participated in my smear campaign were about to realize they backed the wrong horse. News of a public meltdown in a corporate atrium travels through downtown Minneapolis faster than a winter gale. My brother had thrown a spectacular tantrum in front of dozens of high-level executives, wealth managers, and administrative staff. Within 48 hours, the spectacle became the favorite whispered topic during premium client lunches and boardroom coffee breaks. That corporate gossip inevitably bled into the suburban country clubs, piercing the insulated bubble my parents had so carefully constructed. Furthermore, legal filings are a matter of public record. When Kevin formally petitioned for Chapter 7 insolvency, the documentation laid his ruin bare for anyone curious enough to look. The staggering depths of his unsecured debts, the repossessed vehicles, the unpaid country club dues, it all surfaced. The false narrative my mother had spun just weeks prior, the fiction where Kevin was a triumphant heir and I was the banished villain, collapsed under the crushing weight of undeniable reality. The social dynamic flipped with whiplash-inducing speed. The very same people who had eagerly participated in my character assassination suddenly realized they had backed a losing horse. My parents were no longer the wealthy benefactors of a vast lakeside empire. They were financially bleeding, downsizing their own lifestyle to cover the legal fees of a disgraced, unemployed son. I, on the other hand, held the deed to the Wayzata estate and the keys to the Evelyn Foster Trust. Hypocrisy is a fascinating creature. It possesses no shame, only an instinct for survival. By the end of the week, the digital silence I had enjoyed was replaced by a new, equally exhausting influx of incoming communication. The aunts, cousins, and family friends who had sent me venomous texts condemning my supposed selfishness began scrambling to save face. They deployed a coordinated campaign of historical revisionism, attempting to act as if their previous cruelty had never occurred. I experienced this reversal firsthand on a Friday afternoon. I pulled my sedan up to the end of the long driveway at the estate, stopping next to the ornate iron mailbox near the stone entry pillars. I reached out through my car window and pulled a thick stack of envelopes from the metal receptacle. Most of it consisted of standard utility bills and financial statements transferred into my name, but nestled in the center was a square, oversized envelope made of premium, heavy ivory paper. I recognized the return address immediately. It belonged to Aunt Carol. I parked the car in the garage, walked into the warm kitchen, and tossed the stack of mail onto the granite island. I picked up a silver letter opener and sliced through the thick ivory seal. I pulled out a greeting card dripping with expensive gold foil. The front of the card featured a serene watercolor painting of a winter forest, intended to project peace and harmony. I opened the flap and read the handwritten message inside. Dearest Rebecca, Aunt Carol wrote her cursive looping with practiced elegance. We are all so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you possessed your grandmother's brilliant business sense. It takes a very strong woman to manage such a complex estate. Your father and mother are just stressed right now, but family is forever. We would love to come out to the lake house for a celebratory dinner whenever you are settled. Sending you all my love and blessings. I read the sickly sweet paragraphs twice, marveling at the sheer audacity required to pen those words. This was the exact same woman who had left a voicemail declaring she was praying for my cold heart. She had gleefully judged my character, siding with the abusers when she believed they held the power. Now smelling the distinct aroma of wealth and property, she was shamelessly praising my business acumen, hoping to secure an invitation to a house she desperately wanted to tour. She did not offer a genuine apology for her previous viciousness. She simply tried to gloss over the betrayal, using toxic positivity to pave a convenient road straight to my dining room table. I did not reply to her. I did not text her back to accept her hollow blessings. I walked over to the stainless steel recycling bin, ripped the gold foil card into tiny jagged pieces and dropped them into the trash. I treated the rest of the groveling messages with the exact same ruthless efficiency. Cousins who had called me greedy sent casual texts asking if I wanted to grab coffee. Neighbors who had whispered behind my back left cheerful voicemails inquiring about my renovation plans. I denied every single request for access. I did not grant them absolution, and I refused to invite a single one of them to the Wayzata estate. If you are listening to this broadcast and you find yourself navigating the perilous waters of family estrangement, hear this truth clearly. Conditional love is not love at all. It is a transaction. When people show you they only respect you when you are useful, or when they only defend you when you hold the upper hand, you must believe their actions over their apologies. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but it is not a requirement for healing. You do not owe anyone a seat at your table if they were perfectly willing to let you starve in the cold. Holding enablers accountable is often more difficult than confronting the primary abusers. The enablers smile, they speak softly, and they plead for unity. But their complicity is the mortar that holds the toxic family structure together. By setting an impenetrable boundary with the extended relatives, I knowingly chose isolation. There is a profound difference between being lonely and being protected. My previous life, surrounded by parents and a sibling who constantly drained my energy, was the loneliest era I ever endured. Now, standing alone in a massive house, I felt a deep, resonant companionship with my own peace. I was isolated, yes, but it was a healthy, fortified isolation. I had constructed a moat around my mental health, and I was the only person holding the drawbridge. The weekend stretched ahead of me, empty and quiet. I spent Saturday morning driving through the snow-covered streets of the surrounding lakeside towns, picking up supplies from a local hardware store. I was preparing to delve into the physical restoration of the property. For years, my mother had filled the rooms with her own ostentatious decor, burying Evelyn's classic, understated taste under layers of excessive floral prints and heavy drapery. I intended to strip away Susan's influence and resurrect the home my grandmother had actually built. I drove my sedan back along the winding tree-lined roads, the heater blasting warm air against the freezing glass of the windshield. The Minnesota landscape outside was a monochromatic canvas of stark white and deep gray. The beauty of the winter season lies in its brutal honesty. The cold strips away the leaves, the colorful flowers, and the distracting foliage, leaving only the bare structural truth of the branches underneath. I felt a profound alignment with that frozen world. I had stripped away the chaotic noise of my family, the false friends, and the parasitic relatives. Only the bare truth remained. I turned onto the familiar private drive, the tires gripping the cleared asphalt. The Wayzata estate emerged from behind the snow-laden evergreen trees, standing tall and resilient against the darkening afternoon sky. I parked the vehicle and walked up to the heavy oak door, my keys jingling softly in the quiet air. The immediate external battles had been fought and won. The smear campaign was dead, the golden child was banished, and the hypocrites were permanently locked out. Yet a different kind of tension fluttered in my chest as I turned the brass deadbolt and stepped into the grand foyer. Securing the fortress was merely the first phase of the journey. The true challenge lay in uncovering the secrets hidden within its walls. Evelyn Foster was a meticulous, calculating woman who never left anything to chance. She had orchestrated my protection from beyond the grave, anticipating every single move my parents would make. As I walked down the silent, shadowed hallway toward her old private study, a room my parents had largely ignored, I knew she had left something else behind. I was ready to confront the past, to decipher the final message she had hidden, waiting patiently for the day I finally claimed my rightful place. I spent the first 2 weeks of January dismantling my mother's influence room by room. Susan possessed a decorating style that relied heavily on excessive floral patterns, suffocating velvet drapes, and cluttered antique replicas. Her aesthetic was designed to project a false sense of aristocratic heritage, obscuring the clean architectural beauty of the original home. I pulled down the heavy curtains in the guest suites, allowing the harsh, brilliant winter light to flood across the dusty hardwood floors. I packed her gaudy porcelain figurines into cardboard boxes, leaving the flat surfaces bare and breathing. Physical labor provides a unique grounding therapy. With every wall I stripped and every brass fixture I polished, I was actively reclaiming my own territory. I was tearing down the monument to their toxic entitlement and unearthing the foundation my grandmother had actually laid. The study sat at the far end of the eastern hallway. It was a room my parents rarely entered. Richard and Susan valued superficial appearances over intellect, so a quiet office filled with historical biographies, leather-bound encyclopedias, and detailed financial ledgers held zero appeal for them. They had used it merely as a storage closet for discarded holiday decorations and excess furniture. I pushed the heavy mahogany door open early one Tuesday morning. The space smelled of old paper dry cedar wood and trapped dust. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 of the walls, while a massive antique oak desk commanded the center of the room. It was sitting right here that Grandmother Evelyn had managed her extensive investments, tracking market fluctuations while sipping hot black tea. I tied my hair back, grabbed a bucket of warm soapy water, and began the meticulous process of emptying the desk. I sorted through decades of ancient tax returns, expired property records, and faded utility bills. I wiped down the interior wood of the deep drawers, clearing away the accumulated neglect. I pulled the bottom right drawer off its metal tracks to reach a crumpled piece of paper trapped behind it. As I pressed my damp cloth against the back panel of the empty wooden cavity, the panel gave way with a soft, unexpected click. A hidden shallow compartment slid outward on a concealed spring mechanism, revealing a narrow, dark recess. My pulse quickened. Resting inside the secret space, perfectly preserved away from the sunlight, was a single envelope. The casing was made of thick, cream-colored parchment. My name, Rebecca, was written across the front. The handwriting was rendered in that familiar, elegant, shaky blue fountain pen ink. I reached into the compartment and lifted the envelope, my fingertips trembling slightly. As the heavy paper neared my face, a faint, lingering scent wafted into the crisp, dusty air of the study. Lavender. It was Evelyn's signature perfume, a subtle, earthy fragrance she had worn every single day of her life. The smell hit me like a physical wave, bypassing my logical brain and striking directly at my heart. It transported me instantly back to my childhood, to the rare, peaceful afternoons I sat quietly on the floor of this very room while she explained compound interest and the importance of self-reliance. That scent represented the only safe harbor I had ever known, in a house otherwise filled with conditional affection and sharp criticism. I broke the brittle wax seal on the back of the envelope, sliding a folded letter from the casing. I sat down in her heavy leather desk chair, unfolded the heavy stationery, and began to read. "My dearest Rebecca," the letter began, "if you are reading these words, it means the storm has finally broken. It means you stood your ground, the trust has been enacted, and the legal shield I built for you is functioning exactly as intended. I am writing this because I know your heart. I know that beneath your brilliant analytical mind, you carry a heavy burden of unwarranted guilt. You have been conditioned to believe that you owe your parents endless sacrifices." I stopped reading for a moment, letting out a shaky breath. She knew me better than I knew myself. "I want you to know that I saw everything Evelyn wrote, the blue ink pressing deep into the heavy fibers of the page. I saw how Richard and Susan drained your bright light to fuel your brother's endless delusions. I watched you take the public transit bus in the freezing snow to earn minimum wage, while they purchased luxury vehicles for a boy who refused to work a single honest day in his life. I saw them demand your labor while deliberately starving you of maternal and paternal affection." Tears began to pool in my eyes, blurring the cursive script. For 32 years, I had internalized the neglect. I had convinced myself that I was simply unlovable, that some inherent flaw in my personality made me unworthy of their pride. To see the reality of my abuse validated in black and white, documented by the wisest person I ever knew, broke a dam inside my chest. I remained silent during my final years, not because I agreed with their cruelty, the letter continued, but because confronting them openly would only cause them to tighten their grip on you. I needed time to secure the perimeter. I needed time to lock down the assets. You were never unloved because you lacked value, Rebecca. You were neglected because your profound strength intimidated small-minded people. Your mother feared your independence and your father resented your intelligence. I wiped a tear from my cheek, my eyes racing down the page to absorb her final message. "I am leaving you this estate, the portfolios and the trust, not merely as a financial gift. I am giving you a fortress. This wealth is your armor. Do not shed a single tear for them. Do not open your checkbook to save Kevin from the consequences of his own arrogance. Use this house to protect your peace. Build a life filled with people who cherish you, and never let them cross your drawbridge again. You earned this. Now rest." I lowered the letter to the polished surface of the oak desk. For weeks, a tiny, persistent sliver of residual guilt had resided in the darkest corner of my mind. It was the deeply ingrained societal conditioning that dictates we must always honor our parents, no matter how terribly they mistreat us. I had wondered, in my quietest moments of isolation, if taking the house was too ruthless a punishment, if allowing my brother to face bankruptcy was a moral failing on my part. Evelyn's words acted as a powerful solvent, washing away that final trace of doubt entirely. True family protects you from the cold. True family does not view your success as a piggy bank to exploit. True family sees your worth and builds a wall to keep the wolves at bay. I folded the parchment with meticulous care. I carried the letter out of the study and walked down the wide hallway, stepping into the grand living room. I walked directly over to the massive stone fireplace. I reached up and grasped the cheap plastic Mall of America snow globe resting in the center of the mantel. That faded trinket had served its purpose beautifully, anchoring my resolve during the dining room ambush, reminding me of the love I deserved when facing down the people who wanted to destroy me. But I no longer needed a plastic substitute to remember my grandmother's protection. I gently placed the snow globe into a padded storage box. I retrieved a heavy, polished silver frame from my briefcase. I carefully positioned the handwritten letter inside the glass casing, securing the backing. I set the silver frame proudly over the hearth, placing it exactly where the snow globe used to sit. It commanded the room, a permanent, undeniable reminder of my inherent worth. Whenever I walked through the living area, I would see that shaky blue ink and remember the fierce, protective love that had secured my freedom. I stepped back, admiring the display. The Wayzata estate finally felt like home. The ghost of my parents' toxic entitlement had been fully exorcised, replaced by the enduring legacy of a woman who saw my true value. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out across the vast, frozen expanse of the lake. The winter season would eventually yield to the spring thaw, bringing new life to the shoreline. The past was firmly resolved, and as I watched the afternoon sun dip below the tree line, I felt an incredible readiness to witness the final horizon, to see exactly what happens when people who build their lives on manipulation are left alone in the ruins of their own making. 365 days drifted past, carrying the heavy winter snow into a vibrant spring and finally settling into the crisp, golden chill of a Minnesota autumn. I walked out of the back patio doors of the Wayzata estate, my boots stepping softly onto the weathered cedar planks of my private dock. The early morning air held a sharp, biting edge, carrying the rich scent of fallen oak leaves, damp pine needles, and fresh, freshwater algae. A thick layer of white mist hovered just above the pristine surface of the lake, swirling slowly as the rising sun cast long amber shadows across the rippling water. I wrapped both hands around a heavy ceramic mug, letting the heat of the dark roast coffee warm my bare palms. I took a slow sip, tasting the bitter, earthy flavor, and listened to the profound, unbroken quiet of the environment. A solitary loon called out from the far shoreline, its haunting, rhythmic melody echoing across the glass like water. The sound did not break the silence, it enhanced it, emphasizing the vast, untouchable distance between my present reality and the chaotic noise of my past. I turned my head and looked back at the sprawling house. The oppressive, cluttered aesthetic my mother had forced upon the architecture was erased. The estate stood proud and unburdened, featuring clean lines, restored natural wood finishes, and vast, unobstructed windows reflecting the vibrant orange and crimson autumn foliage. I had spent the summer months working alongside local contractors, stripping away the dark velvet drapes, peeling off the gaudy floral wallpapers, and sanding the original hardwood floors back to their natural glowing state. It was no longer a monument to unearned prestige or a stage for suburban theatricals. It was a home. It was my sanctuary, built on the solid foundation of my grandmother's quiet wisdom. The meticulous restoration of the property mirrored the profound restoration of my own life. Unburdened by the relentless demands and emotional drainage of my former relatives, my professional career flourished in ways I had never anticipated. At the financial firm downtown, my manager recognized my sustained, hyper-focused performance. Without the constant looming anxiety of subsidizing another adult's extravagant lifestyle, I was able to dedicate my energy to innovative market strategies. I received a promotion to Senior Risk Director, stepping into a leadership role that commanded respect and significant compensation. I invested my income with clear, unclouded vision, securing a diverse portfolio that would sustain me for decades to come. More importantly, I populated the bright, empty rooms of the lake house with a newly formed, chosen family. Just the previous weekend, I hosted a large dinner party for trusted colleagues and close friends. We cooked together in the expansive, remodeled kitchen, the air filled with the savory scent of roasted garlic and the bright sound of genuine laughter. We shared stories, poured good wine, and debated trivial matters until past midnight. There were no hidden agendas at that dining table. Nobody handed me a printed spreadsheet of their personal debts. Nobody monitored my annual bonuses or demanded I fund their impulsive vacations. We shared mutual, unwavering respect, recognizing each other's boundaries and celebrating each other's individual victories without a trace of jealousy. I learned a vital truth during those warm evenings. Authentic connection does not require a shared bloodline. It only requires consistent reciprocal care. While my world expanded into the sunlight, the toxic ecosystem I left behind collapsed into the dark, inevitable gravity of its own design. I did not seek out updates regarding my parents or my brother. I did not stalk their digital footprints, and I firmly instructed my few remaining connections in their town to spare me the gossip. But in a tightly knit, status-obsessed community, the truth finds its way to the surface, presenting itself not as a victory to be celebrated, but as a simple, objective fact of consequence. The imposing suburban fortress, the brick monument where Richard and Susan had reigned supreme, was listed for sale during the late summer months. The financial strain of Kevin's spectacular ruin proved too heavy a burden for their carefully guarded retirement accounts to bear. My brother's insolvency filings finalized in the county court, formally stripping away his luxury vehicles, his premium country club memberships, and his oversized mortgage. Destitute and lacking any marketable professional skills, the golden child packed his remaining belongings and moved back into his childhood bedroom. To shield him from his aggressive creditors and sustain his basic living expenses, my father was forced to delay his retirement indefinitely. Richard accepted a lateral corporate demotion just to maintain a steady paycheck, working long hours under executives a full decade younger than him. The stress aged him rapidly, draining the blustering authority he used to project. Susan packed away her designer outfits and canceled her charity gala subscriptions, retreating from the high society circles she once manipulated so effortlessly. She could no longer afford the dues, and she could not endure the pitying stares of the women she used to judge. They sold the sprawling house and downsized to a modest, cramped condominium in a neighboring, less prestigious suburb, trapped in a suffocating space with the very sun they had spoiled into a monster. I felt no joy in their downfall. Gloating requires a lingering emotional attachment, a petty desire to prove your superiority to the people who hurt you. I felt nothing but a cool, detached acknowledgement of cause and effect. They had cultivated a parasite feeding it with my resources and their own endless indulgence. When my resources were permanently withdrawn, the parasite simply turned around and devoured the host. Toxic entitlement is a self-consuming fire. It requires zero interference to burn itself down to ash. I walked to the very edge of the wooden dock, watching a gentle northern breeze ripple across the surface of the lake. The morning mist dissolved into the warming air, revealing the vast, endless horizon of the Minnesota landscape. If you have spent your life playing the role of the reliable scapegoat, you know the exhausting, relentless ache of trying to earn your place at a table where the game is rigged against you. You contort yourself into shapes of endless utility. You pay the overdue bills, you solve the manufactured crises, you absorb the passive insults, and you wait patiently for the day they finally recognize your inherent worth. You believe that if you just give enough, fix enough, and endure enough, the unconditional love you crave will eventually materialize out of thin air. That is the cruelest illusion of all. You cannot purchase love from people who view you as an automated teller machine. You cannot earn respect from individuals who base their own fragile identity on keeping you small. Their affection is a moving target designed to keep you exhausted, compliant, and deeply insecure. When you finally stop handing over your energy, they will call you selfish. They will call you cold. They will launch coordinated smear campaigns and demand your immediate return to the designated subservient role. Do not listen to the noise. Their anger is merely the sound of a broken system losing its primary power source. Walking away from the people who raised you is the most difficult, excruciating decision a person can make. Polite society will judge you, extended relatives will shame you, but preserving your own mental, financial, and spiritual health is never a failure. It is the ultimate victory. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep their delusions warm. You are allowed to take the key lock, the heavy oak door, and build a beautiful life that belongs solely to you. I finished the last drop of my dark roast coffee. The ceramic mug felt warm and solid in my hands. The morning sun climbed higher into the bright, cloudless sky, promising a beautiful, unobstructed day. Thank you for joining me on Morning Revenge. Remember to value your peace above their noise. Like, subscribe, and I will see you next time. The American family has long been heralded as the bedrock of our society, a sanctuary where values are forged, resilience is born, and the future is written. We paint a pristine picture of suburban life, manicured lawns, holiday dinners, and unwavering loyalty. Yet, as we look closely at the architecture of the modern household, we often find a quiet rot eating away at the foundation beneath the floorboards. This decay does not come from external forces, economic shifts, or societal decline. It is cultivated right at the dining room table. It is the tragedy of the golden child and the invisible workhorse. When we reflect on the narrative of a family shattered by its own entitlement, a daughter banished for her independence, a son destroyed by his parents' endless bailouts, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about what we mistake for love. To parents across America holding tight to the ideals of traditional family education, this narrative serves as a stark, unforgiving mirror. We are frequently taught that providing for our children means removing their obstacles, paving a golden road, so they might never know the sting of failure. We equate financial support with maternal and paternal devotion. But there is a profound, dangerous difference between nurturing a child and consuming them to feed our own egos. When you shield a child from the natural consequences of their actions, you are not protecting them. You are amputating their ability to survive in a world that will not cater to their whims. Enabling is a form of parental abandonment. You abandon their character development in favor of preserving a comfortable, polite illusion. Fairness in a family does not mean equal financial handouts, regardless of behavior. True fairness is the consistent enforcement of emotional awareness, honesty, and accountability. It is having the courage to let your child fall, knowing that the bruises of failure are the only elements that build genuine moral fortitude. When parents worship prestige and prioritize community perception over the messy, difficult work of holding their children accountable, they do not raise successful adults. They raise fragile tyrants. The ultimate legacy you leave your children is not the real estate in your portfolio, the vintage heirlooms, or the trust funds. It is the resilience in their spine. If you fund their irresponsibility, you are financing their eventual destruction. For the young men and women navigating the perilous waters of familial expectation, the message from the quiet, competent daughter is one of radical liberation. In traditional cultures, the mandate to honor your mother and father is often weaponized into a demand for absolute, unquestioning submission. You are taught the gospel of the people-pleaser. If you just work a little harder, achieve a little more, and shrink your own needs to accommodate the family's dysfunction, you will finally earn your place at the table. You are conditioned to view your own capability as a communal resource. Do not fall for the trap of the loyal martyr. Your competence is not a currency meant to be drained by those who refuse to carry their own weight. Honoring your family does not require you to participate in its sickness. True respect for the concept of the family unit sometimes means possessing the strength to walk away and break the generational cycle of exploitation. Your worth is not defined by your utility to others. It is forged in the quiet hours when you stand alone, look at the staggering weight of their demands, and decide that you will no longer set yourself on fire to keep their delusions warm. If we step back and observe the current state of American society through the lens of a spiritual practitioner, the breakdown of the family unit takes on an even deeper, more resonant meaning. We live in an era paralyzed by instant gratification, hyper-consumerism, and the relentless external validation of the ego. We have forgotten the ancient, rigorous path of self-cultivation. People mistakenly believe that peace is found by acquiring more status, more control, more compliance from those around us. True spiritual resilience, the development of wisdom and morality, requires facing the stark, unvarnished truth of our own suffering. It requires the discipline to stop grasping for things we have not earned and to detach from the toxic need for control. When we look at the parents who demand compliance and the son who demands unearned wealth, we see souls trapped in the lowest frequencies of existence. They are tethered completely to material illusion and societal approval, walking through their lives entirely asleep. To awaken, one must practice the spiritual art of the boundary. In many spiritual traditions, compassion is not a soft, yielding, polite thing. It is a fierce, boundary-setting force. Fierce compassion is having the moral clarity to say no to toxicity, knowing that by refusing to enable a destructive pattern, you are offering the abuser their only real chance at spiritual growth. The daughter's refusal to pay the debt was the most profoundly moral spiritual act she could have performed. She stopped participating in the karmic loop of their illusion. She stepped into her own power, cultivating an inner peace that no external manipulation, smear campaign, or threat of disownment could touch. Finding the courage to reclaim your life from the people who were supposed to protect you is a solitary, harrowing journey. It requires stepping out of the comfortable fog of denial and walking into the freezing, bracing air of reality. But you do not have to walk it entirely in the dark. If this reflection speaks to the quiet battles you fight behind closed doors, I encourage you to subscribe and follow the channel Morning Revenge. Join a community dedicated to unpacking the truth, holding the line, and finding the profound peace that comes after the storm. As we consider the wreckage of the entitled family and the serene silence of the empty lake house, we are left with a philosophical truth that goes entirely against the grain of conventional sentimental thinking. We are told our whole lives that family is about holding on at all costs, that blood requires us to weather any storm together. But perhaps the highest, purest form of love you can offer a deeply broken system is the willingness to let it collapse. Sometimes love is not a warm embrace, it is a locked door. It is the absolute withdrawal of your light so that those sitting comfortably in the dark are finally forced to open their own eyes. When the dust settles and the noise fades, ask yourself, are the bridges you are so desperately trying to keep from burning actually the very structures keeping you imprisoned? The smoke will always clear, but the horizon you see afterward will depend entirely on whether you had the courage to strike the match. About Morning Revenge and my content creation process. Dear YouTube team, my name is Tan, and I am the owner and creator of the YouTube channel Morning Revenge. I would like to briefly introduce my channel and explain how I research, create, produce, and publish my content. Morning Revenge is a storytelling channel primarily created for women ages 25 and older, including viewers over 55. My stories focus on family relationships, parental favoritism, unfair treatment, emotional conflicts, and difficult situations between parents, children, and siblings. The main message behind my stories is simple. Parents should treat all of their children fairly with love, respect, and compassion. Through fictional and dramatized stories, I hope to encourage parents to reflect on the emotional consequences of favoritism, while also providing viewers with engaging and meaningful entertainment. Creating content is my profession and an important part of my career. I take YouTube's policies seriously, including the community guidelines, copyright policies, reused content policies, advertiser-friendly content guidelines, and other platform requirements. I regularly follow policy updates and continuously improve my workflow to remain compliant. My research and creative process, I often research topics through public discussions on communities, such as Reddit storytelling trends on YouTube and YouTube Studio's inspiration features. These sources help me understand what topics may interest my audience. However, I do not simply copy or republish other creators' videos or finished stories. I use research as inspiration and then develop my own storyline, characters, conflicts, dialogue, emotional progression, and ending. For script development, I use Gemini as an AI-assisted writing and brainstorming tool. It helps me organize ideas and explore different storytelling possibilities. I personally review, edit, and revise the material before publication, checking the story structure, logic, dialogue, emotional development, and overall message. AI is a tool in my workflow while I remain responsible for the final creative decisions. Production and editing. After completing the script I use for narration and voiceover, I then prepare visual materials to support different parts of the story. I may also use relaxing footage to create a comfortable viewing experience for audiences listening to the story. I use to edit the final video, including narration, synchronization, scene, timing, transitions, visuals, and overall pacing. For thumbnails, I use Canva to create a thumbnail specifically designed around each video's story and central conflict. Before publishing, I carefully review the completed video, including the script, narration, visuals, editing, and thumbnail. Audience engagement and my commitment. I regularly read and respond to viewer comments and use the Community tab to communicate with my audience. Their feedback helps me understand what they enjoy and how I can improve future content. I understand the importance of maintaining high standards for monetized content, and I sincerely respect YouTube's review process. I kindly ask the YouTube team to consider my complete creative process when reviewing Morning Revenge. My goal is to create original storytelling experiences through research, creative development, writing, narration, visual production, editing, and continuous audience engagement. I am committed to continuing to learn, improve, and follow YouTube's policies. Thank you very much for taking the time to review my channel and understand the work behind my content. Sincerely, Tan, owner and creator of Morning Revenge,